Good evening, welcome to your town hall.
And I'm going to turn my microphone off before Councilmember Lutz reminds me. Having reached the hour of 6:30, I hereby call the meeting to order. Reminder that it's being broadcast. Tonight we'll begin our regular council meeting. After the pledge, I'll recess the regular meeting to conduct 2 community facilities district meetings. And following that, we'll convene our regular meeting. Tonight's invocation will be given by Chief Chuck Wonder of the Green Valley Fire District, followed by the pledge by the Mayor and Council. Chief?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. You'll join me in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to gather here tonight with these leaders who have committed themselves to service to the town of Sarita. I ask that your Holy Spirit preside over this meeting and that you provide guidance and wisdom to those here tonight as everyone works together for the betterment of the town. I would ask that you encourage all here tonight to have open ears to what is being shared and receptive hearts to varied opinions as everyone works on the business at hand. Lord, I would also like to ask for special blessings for all of our students in our community. This has been a challenging year. Let them finish strong. Let them have encouragement for tomorrow. And most importantly, please keep them safe as they enjoy the celebrations surrounding graduation and the end of school. We love you, and we ask these things in your Son's precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Chief. Please join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks a lot for those words, Chief. I'll hereby suspend the town council and regular town council meeting and commence with the Rancho Sarita Community Facilities District meeting. I hereby call to the meeting of the Rancho Sarita Community Facilities District to order. And Madam Clerk, I'll have a roll.
Board Member Bracco, absent. Board Member Davis.
Here.
Board Member Hicks.
Here.
Board Member Lutz.
Here.
Board Member Morales.
Here.
Vice Mayor Eckert.
Here.
Pardon me. Vice Chairperson Eckert.
I'm still here.
Vice Chairperson Murphy.
Here.
Chairperson Murphy.
You voted. Thank
Board
you.
President.
I appreciate that. Next is call to the public. At any time, any member of the public is invited to address the district board on any issue which is on tonight's consent agenda or any issue which the district board can lawfully act upon at a future meeting. Pursuant to the Arizona Open Meeting Laws, the district board may not discuss the items, but individual members of the district board may respond to criticism made by those who address the district board, may ask staff to review the matter, or may ask the matter be placed on a future agenda. I don't have any call to the public cards for the CFD for Rancho Sarita. Does anybody want to address this? Seeing no movement, I will declare the call to public closed and move to item number 4. At this time, I'll Madam Clerk. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the consent agenda.
Consent agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Now we come to item number 5. This is what I was thinking of Madam Clerk on.
Discussion and possible adoption of resolution number 2021-0019 of the District Board of the Rancho Sarita Community Facilities District, a community facilities district of Arizona, approving a tentative budget for fiscal year 2022 in the amount of $20,456,500 pursuant to section 48-716 Arizona Revised Statutes as amended, setting a public hearing date on said tentative budget, filing statements and estimates of the operation and maintenance expenses of the Rancho Sarita Community Facilities District, the cost of capital improvements to be financed by the approved ad valorem tax levy, and the amount of all other expenditures for public infrastructure and enhanced municipal services proposed to be paid from the tax levy, and of the amount to be raised to pay general obligation bonds of the Rancho Sarita Community Facilities District, all of which shall be provided for by the levy and collection of ad valorem taxes on the assessed value of all the real and personal property in the Rancho Sarita Community Facilities District, providing for notice of filing the statements and estimates and notice of a public hearing on the portions of the statements and estimates not relating to debt service on general obligation bonds, and providing that this resolution shall be effective after its passage and approval according to law.
Thank you. That's almost as long as my 2 proclamations I'm going to read later on. This time, our district treasurer, Mr. Mariotti, will be presenting this item.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This particular item will provide you an opportunity to adopt the tentative budget for fiscal year 2022, which commences on July 1st. So just as a reminder, the tentative budget sets the budget ceiling for the year. So when we come back for the final budget adoption, it can only be as high as what's set today. So it could be lower from the amount that you set today, but it can go no higher than the amount set today. So with that, I'll provide a little bit of background on the district, mostly for the benefit of the public. It was formed on March 24th, 2014 by a the Town Council resolution. The district encompasses 943 acres, and it's all within the the town limits. At build-out, the district is expected to have 3,267 residential units in it, and also include about 1.25 million square feet of commercial space. So each year, right around January time frame, we receive information from Pima County, specifically from the county assessor's office, about the property that's within the district. Now, the information on the assessment rolls is a little bit dated because they go out at certain points of time and then do their assessments and then compile it all. The assessment rolls in this particular case are dated December 2020. So that information identified that there are 162 residential lots in the district, which represents 5% build out. So if you take 162 divided by the 3,267 plan, that's 5%. So this number is 116 more than last year. So that's a 252% growth rate. So that's a substantial amount of growth that's happened, that's occurred in the district over the year. Interestingly, of the 162 lots, 97 are identified as rental properties. Total net taxable assessed valuation is $6.95 million, and this is $3.75 million more than last year, so it's more than double again, just signifying the amount of growth that's occurred. And of the $6.95 million, $1.86 million comes from commercial lots. So the district is a tax-levying public improvement district that is authorized pursuant to state statutes. Its purpose is to finance the acquisition, maintenance of public infrastructure and facilities. When the district was formed, there was a bond election that was held that authorized, and it was successful, it authorized up to $60 million in bond capacity, and also authorized the district to levy a debt service property tax, which would be used to pay off any bonds that are issued. There were bonds issued in 2018 and in 2020, and the cumulative amount of outstanding debt through this fiscal year will be $8.93 million on the bonds that were issued. The district still has $50.74 million in bond capacity remaining. So what did the bonds finance? The bonds financed roadway acquisition, and the 2020 bonds will also include an element for sewer lines. So what's its relationship to the town? The district is legally separate from the town, so any debt that's issued by the district that does not count towards the town's debt limits. However, since the town council members also sit as district board members, yourselves, town staff also function as district staff. Since we use the same systems, we use the same controls that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board says it's so intertwined with the town that it really needs to be included in the financial reports. So indeed it is for us. It's considered a blended component unit of the town, and it's accounted for in a special revenue fund in the town's financial reports. The district itself does not issue separate financial statements. Okay, so all that to finally lead into the budget. So in fiscal year 2022, the budget is programmed for $20,456,500. This is significantly higher than the current year budget, which is $3.78 million. And it's higher because the budget anticipates that there will be a debt issuance in the fiscal year. And obviously, because it's a balanced budget where sources equal financing uses, with debt you have additional financing sources, so the overall budget goes up. So the budget is balanced, so financing sources do equal uses, which means that every dollar we have at the beginning of the year, plus all the funds that we're going to collect during the year, which include debt proceeds, is accounted for somewhere to be spent or to be saved for future years. And it's a little more than that in the fact that we also don't issue debt to pay for any operational or ongoing costs. So indeed, it is balanced. Now, we do issue debt for one-time costs for capital items, but never for operations. We're not allowed to do that. So we received a preliminary draft bond application from the master developer, and that request, as we started to digest it a little bit and include bond issuance costs, would mean that we need to issue almost $16 million of bonds next fiscal year. That represents 78% of the total funding sources for the budget. Beginning balances are $3.127 million, and that represents unspent bond proceeds from the 2020 bond issuance. So we know that pretty soon the developer will come to us to acquire the infrastructure that's almost completed. So probably early next fiscal year, that $3.127 million will be spent. Property taxes make up $338,000 of the budget. The district does levy a $4.99 tax rate. This tax rate has been unchanged for a number of years now. 30 cents of that tax rate is used to pay for operations, maintenance, and administrative costs in the district, and $4.69 of that rate is used to pay for principal, interest, and any banking fees associated with the bonds that are issued. Where those property tax collections are deficient in paying the annual debt service obligations that we have, the developer has a standby contribution agreement where he basically has to subsidize the property taxes to make sure that we can pay off the bondholders. So next fiscal year, we're looking at collecting a little bit more than $1 million from the master developer towards that goal. If we look at the expenditure side of the equation and uses, you see that about $8.5 million, or 41% of the total budget, is for capital outlay. $3.127 million of that is financed from the 2020 bonds, as I mentioned earlier, and the rest would be financed from a new debt issuance. Debt service at a little more than $2 million includes $242,000 for bond principal, $1.1 million for bond interest, and capacity for up to $650,000 in bond issuance costs. We don't know what the costs are going to be. It's a placeholder amount. Operations are programmed at $20,000, so it's such a small portion of the budget, but that would account for district administrative costs, engineering costs, and street maintenance costs. Ending fund balances represent unspent bond proceeds from the anticipated new bond issuance, so not all of it would be spent next fiscal year. Some of it would carry forward to future years. And that was determined from the bond application, the draft bond application that we received from the master developer, and they have a schedule of infrastructure completion, and we use those time frames to determine how much would occur in 2022 and how much we need to carry forward for the future. So as you can see, a lot of this budget is really contingent upon the board authorizing new debt in this upcoming fiscal year. Now, the budget doesn't compel you to issue new debt, it just provides capacity to do so. So we know that the developer is intending to make that request of the board. So we wanted to build that into the budget. Obviously, there's a process that needs to occur before any bonds will be issued, including the board authorizing a feasibility report we conducted, followed by a couple of public hearings before bonds would be authorized. So with that, the resolution before you would approve the fiscal year 2022 tentative budget. If approved, that budget would be filed and made available with the district clerk, put on our website, and also at the local library. The resolution also establishes a public hearing and notice for final budget adoption at the next meeting in 2 weeks on May 24th. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the board.
Thank you. Just one quick question. It was a little surprising on the amount of rentals out there. How do we identify that? Or how do we know that percentage of homes are rentals?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that number just comes from the assessment rules. So a better question would be, how does the assessor make that determination? And I don't have the answer to that question.
Okay.
But I can find out.
Okay. No, I was just more curious, because I know a lot of people who have moved there, but I don't think that's almost 100%.
Yeah.
That just seems, not that I'd question the assessor, like he's looking at my property, but it just seems, if in your spare time, if you have multiple, you should find out. It just seemed really high, in like, knowing how many people are moving right there. Yeah. Any questions? Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, just a quick one, AC. So just my clarification,
we approved the budget, that includes the bond, the next bond. We still have to go through the approval to approve that bond, correct? This just gives us the capacity if that bond goes through the whole process.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that is correct. It just provides capacity. It doesn't compel you to approve the bonds.
If not, I'll entertain a motion at this time.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I move to adopt resolution number 2021-0019.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Having no more further business for the this Community Facilities District, I'll adjourn and now commence with the Coyle Creek Community Facilities District. Calling this meeting to order, and Madam Clerk, may I have a roll?
Board Member Bracco, absent. Board Member Davis.
Yeah.
Board Member Hicks.
Here.
Board Member Lusk.
Here.
Board Member Morales.
Here.
Vice Chairperson Eckert.
Here.
Chairperson Murphy.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thanks. Item number 3 is called for public. At this time, any member of the public is invited to address the district board on any issue which is on tonight's consent agenda or any issue which the district board can lawfully act upon at a future meeting. Pursuant to Arizona open meeting laws, the district board may not discuss the items that individual members of the district board may respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the district board, may ask after review the matter, or may ask that the matter be placed on a future agenda. I have no cards for this facilities district meeting. Seeing no movement, I will declare the call to public closed and move to item number 9, which is the consent agenda, and entertain a motion.
Move to adopt.
Second.
All those in favor signify by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Now we come to item number 5. Madam Clerk.
Discussion and possible adoption of resolution number 40 of the District Board of the Coyle Creek Community Facilities District, a community facilities district of Arizona, approving a tentative budget for fiscal year 2022 in the amount of $1,040,910 pursuant to section 48-716 Arizona Revised Statutes as amended. Setting a public hearing date on said tentative budget, filing statements and estimates of the operation and maintenance of expenses of the Coyle Creek Community Facilities District, the cost of capital improvements to be financed by the approved ad valorem tax levy, and the amount of all other expenditures for public infrastructure and enhanced municipal services proposed to be paid from the tax levy, and of the amount to be raised to pay general obligation bonds of the Coyle Creek Community Facilities District, all of which shall be provided for by the levy and collection of ad valorem taxes on the assessed value of all the real and personal property in the Coyle Creek Community Facilities District, providing for a notice of filing of the statements and estimates and notice of a public hearing on the portions of the statements and estimates not relating to debt service on general obligation bonds, and providing that this resolution shall be effective after its passage and approval according to law.
Thank you. And Mr. Mariotti is going to be earning his money tonight, and he's going once again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. It takes an attorney to come up with that agenda like this.
Yes, he does.
Doesn't come from the finance department.
Well, yes,
This-
because your presentations are much faster.
With your poison, I guess. So this agenda item will provide you an opportunity to approve and to adopt a tentative budget for the Quail Creek Community Facilities District for fiscal year 2022, which commences on July 1. So a little bit of background information on this district. It was formed in September 12th, 2005, and that was done by the Town Council resolution. It includes 1,192 acres, all within the Sahuarita town limits. Now, the Quail Creek development itself is actually larger than that. It's 2,113 acres, so the district represents about a little bit more than half of the total community. At build-out, there are 2,600 residential units planned. So again, we get the information from the county assessor's office, and those assessment rolls indicate that there are 993 residential units, which represents 38% build-out. 115, this is 115 more than last year, and of the 993, 179 are listed as rental properties. Total net taxable assessed valuation of the district is $30.82 million, which is $4.1 million more than last year, so that's 15% more. So you can see that the majority of the increase in assessed valuation is tied to the new homes that came on board, but as we all know, there's a component where all of our valuations are going up, that our homes are worth more. And we're seeing that in the home price sales. So the district is a tax-levying public improvement district that's authorized by state statutes, whose purpose is to finance the acquisition and maintenance of public infrastructure and facilities. In one form, there was a bond election that was successful that authorized $30 million in bonding capacity, as well as authorized the district to levy a debt service property tax. There has been one general obligation bond issued back in 2006, which will term in 2030, so it's kind of on our radar there. That was to the tune of $12.66 million. Of that amount, $7.37 million remains outstanding kind of from the end of this fiscal year. So the bonds financed the acquisition of Campbell Avenue and Coyle Creek Parkway. It included the acquisition of wash crossings, landscaping, sewer lines, and construction of a portion of Coyle Creek Veterans Municipal Park. It is a legally separate entity, so any debt that it issues is not incorporated into the town's debt limits. However, as the town council members sit as the district board members, as town staff sit as district staff members, and we use all the same systems and policies. It's so intertwined with the town that the Governmental Accounting Standards Board requires it to be incorporated into the town's financial reporting entity. It's considered a blended component unit of the town, and it's accounted for as a special revenue fund, and it does not issue its own financial reports. So with that, the budget for fiscal year 2022 is programmed at $1,040,910. This is $30,000 more than the current budget, so 3% more, and that's because property tax valuations are increasing, which accounts for the increase in the overall budget. It is a balanced budget in that our financing sources are equal to our financing uses, and there is no debt to pay for operations as we're not allowed to do so. So it is truly a balanced budget. Looking at the district revenues, you see the vast majority, 97%, come in the form of property tax revenues. This is generated from a $3.30 tax rate. 30 cents of that rate is used for operations and maintenance, and $3 of that is used to pay bond principal interest and banking fees associated with that debt. This tax rate is unchanged for a number of years now. It's been the same. However, even though the assessed valuations are going up and property tax revenues, there's more being generated, it's still not enough to fulfill the debt service obligations. So we still have a little bit of a gap there, about $34,000, which the developer will have to subsidize that, and we expect that to come in the form of a contribution next fiscal year. Probably when we meet next year, that'll go away, and once that goes away, the tax rate then can start to come down. So as the burden shared amongst, the larger group of homeowners out there, then each can pay a lesser amount. So that's some good news for the future. If we look at the expenditure side, you see that the vast majority is that the district really exists mostly to pay for its principal and interest payments. So $954,000, 92% is for principal and interest. Small portion, 8%, $87,000 is for operations. Those operating costs include roadway maintenance in the district. Also, a portion of the maintenance of the Coyle Creek Veterans Municipal Park is included in that balance. Should point out that debt principal is $725,000. Interest payments are $224,000, and then there's a small other component of $5,000. You'll notice there are no any fund balances because the district consumes all of its available resources. So the resolution before you would adopt the 2022 tentative budget, at which point the tentative budget would be filed and made available with the district clerk and on the website and in the Celebrate Library. It also establishes a public hearing and notice of final budget adoption for the next meeting on May 24th, 2 weeks from today. That'll turn it over to Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. I know before you were tracking, which I always thought was interesting, how many homes were being built out in Coyle Creek in the non-CFD area as opposed to the CFD area. And it was always more, actually, in the CFD area. Are you still tracking that? Do you have any feedback on that?
I don't have any feedback on that this particular year, but that's one of those things that I can research and
Well, that's okay. I just thought it was interesting.
I can assure you that there are more homes going into the non-CFD at this point in time.
Okay.
Everything south of the Quail Creek crossing is outside the CFD, basically, and that's a major growth area.
Yep. Thanks. Any questions? No? If not, I'll entertain a motion. Or not.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt resolution 40.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, signify by aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and having no more further business, we're adjourned and return to our regular meeting. Madam Clerk?
Would you like a roll call?
Yes, roll call, please.
Councilmember Bracco, absent. Councilmember Davis.
Here.
Councilmember Hicks.
Here.
Councilmember Lutz.
Here.
Councilmember Morales. Vice Mayor Egbert. Vice Mayor Egbert.
Here.
Mayor Murphy.
Here.
Quorum present.
Thanks. As I mentioned earlier, I have a couple of presentations. The first one will be a proclamation declaring May 9th through the 15th, 2021 as Economic Development Week to Economic Development Director Victor Gonzalez. And I'll join you at the podium if you'd like. I'll be reading the presentation and we'll take pictures afterwards. Whereas the International Economic Development Council has created Economic Development Week to celebrate the achievements of economic developers from May 9th to May 15th, 2021. And whereas economic development promotes economic well-being, quality of life for their communities by creating, retaining, expanding jobs that facilitate growth, enhance wealth, and provide a stable tax base. And whereas economic development stimulates, incubates entrepreneurship in order to help and establish the next generation of new businesses. And whereas the town of Sahuarita strategic plan acknowledges and prioritizes economic development goals that result in economic prosperity, growth, and creating a sense of place. And whereas the town of Sahuarita is a growing community that has experienced an increase in residential growth with 464 total single-family home permits during fiscal year 2020, and whereas the town of Sahuarita has experienced economic development growth and success during the recent years with over $78.9 million in public and private capital investment, over 240,000 square feet of new commercial, medical, industrial development, collectively representing 521 new jobs, and whereas the town of Sahuarita will continue to foster and promote future economic development projects that contribute to a prosperous and healthy community. Now therefore be it resolved that I, Tom Murphy, Mayor of the town of Sahuarita, on behalf of the town council, do hereby proclaim May 9th through the 15th, 2021 as Economic Development Week, and testimony whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused to be affixed the seal of the town of Sahuarita on this 10th day of May 2021. Congratulations. Grab a picture. Thanks. No, I agree with you. No, you sure? Okay. Next, I will be presenting and declaring the month of May 2021 as Building Safety Month to Planning and Building Director Anna Cassidy. Whereas the town of Sahuarita is committed to recognizing that our growth and strength depends on the safety and economic value of the homes, buildings, and infrastructure that serve our citizens, both in everyday life and in times of disaster. And whereas our confidence in the resilience of these buildings that make up our communities achieved through the devotion of vigilant guardians, building safety and fire prevention officials, architects, engineers, builders, tradespeople, design professionals, laborers, plumbers, and others in the construction industry who work year-round to ensure the safe construction of buildings. And whereas these guardians are dedicated members of the International Code Council, a nonprofit that brings together local, state, federal officials that are experts in the built environment to create and implement the highest quality codes to protect us in the buildings where we live, learn, work, play. And whereas our nation benefits economically and technology from these using the international codes that are developed by a national voluntary consensus codes and standards development organization. Does that mean I have to stop the call to vote? Our government is able to avoid the high cost and complexity of developing and maintaining these codes, which are the most widely adopted building safety and fire prevention codes in the world. And whereas these modern building codes include safeguards to protect the public from hazards such as hurricanes, snowstorms, tornadoes, wildland fires, floods, earthquakes. And whereas the Building Safety Month is sponsored by the International Code Council to remind the public about the critical role of our community's largely unknown protectors of public safety, our local code officials, who assure us of a safe, sustainable, energy-efficient, and livable buildings that are essential to America's prosperity. And whereas prevent, prepare, protect, building codes save, the theme of the Building Safety Month 2021 encourages all Americans to raise awareness about the importance of safe and resilient construction, fire prevention, disaster mitigation, energy conservation, water safety, training the next generation, and new technologies in the construction industry. And whereas each year in observance of Building Safety Month, people all over the world are asked to consider the commitment to improve building safety, resilience, and economic investment at home and in the community, and to acknowledge the essential services provided to all of us by local and state building departments, fire prevention bureaus, and federal agencies in protecting lives and property. Now therefore, it be resolved that I, Tom Murphy, the mayor of the town of Samarita, on behalf of the town council, do hereby proclaim the month of May 2021 as Building Safety Month, in testimony whereof I have hereunto set my hand and caused to be affixed the seal of the town of Samarita on this 10th day of May 2021. Hopefully, when we do inspections, it's shorter than my proclamation. Okay. Congratulations. Thank you. Just the safety ones? Yep. Yeah, no. So, thank you.
Building codes have been around for centuries and have obviously evolved quite a bit over that time period. We're very fortunate in the town of Sahuarita that we have a building safety division that is really truly passionate about making sure that the buildings that Sahuarita residents, workers, and shoppers occupy are safe. So thank you, Mayor Murphy and members of the council, for taking the time to recognize how important the building safety division is to our town.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, all the hard work, and to see both fire districts here, fire departments here, so thanks for all that hard work. I know it's a team effort. Next is item number 6, which is approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second?
All in favor, signify by aye.
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 Agenda is approved for this evening. Item number 7 is call to the public. At this time, any member of the public is invited to address the town council on any issue which is on tonight's consent agenda or any issue which the town council can lawfully act upon at a future meeting. Pursuant to Arizona open meeting laws, the council may not discuss the items, but individual members of the council may respond to criticism made by those who have addressed the council, may ask staff to review the matter, or may ask the matter to be placed on a future agenda. I do not have any speaker cards for the regular meeting. Would anybody like to address the council? Seeing no movement, I will declare the call to the public closed. Now we come to council and town manager, a brief summary of current events. Mr. Udall. Had to get used to having this again, right?
Exactly. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I do have a few things I'd like to present to you in the manager's report. One of those is that you'll notice that we've kind of switched a little bit around here, and this is made so that the town clerk has a little more visual of the council, and she can track those that make motions and seconds and those kind of things. So it's for a practical reason. It's really not that I wanted to get closer to the council. So the first thing I wanted to tell you was that we anticipate that Popeyes will open this Thursday.
Okay.
So we haven't received official notice, but tentative notice, and so we hope that that will happen this Thursday. Also, I wanted to give you a little bit of an update on our delinquent sewer accounts. As you know, this was quite the problem for us, and the council took action that allowed us to move forward with a program to terminate service if we couldn't get these delinquent accounts to come in and pay. In fact, we started out in February with almost 1,300 delinquent accounts totaling a little over $700,000. We sent letters of termination because we couldn't get action on these customers, on 209 customers, which totaled about $362,000. And as of today, we have only 42 that have not paid their account. We have not needed to terminate anyone yet. So they've all, of the 209 that we sent out termination notices, they've all come in and paid except for 42 of them. 43. We actually have one slated for turn off on May 17th. We're hoping that that account will come in and pay as well. So it is working, the strategy is working, and we hope again not to have to turn off sewer service, and that people will work with our folks in the billing department and come in and set up payment plans. A few things from Parks and Rec. We are beginning to do our summer programs, and so in fact our first summer recreation program begins June 1st, and this is for the ages of 6 through 12, and they're taking registrations for that program now. And that's called Camp Sahuarita. Weekend swimming will also begin on May 29th, and so we have been accepting applications for lifeguards. I think we have one slot yet to fill, so if anybody knows of anyone, send them our way. I don't know if you've had a chance to go over to our lake park, but if you have, you've seen the bridge there, you can't miss it. It's really nice. Yeah, and they've yet to do a few little touch-ups to the bridge, but mostly it's intact or in place. We are going to do some irrigation lines in the lawn in front of the bridge, and so that'll keep that grass nice and green. And by the time our Parks and Rec staff is done with it, that'll be a really nice feature that I can envision a lot of wedding photos and those type of things taken there. They are also busy installing a pollinator garden. That's out of Dynamax, as well as a nature trail and a disc golf course. All those out of Dynamax, so they're busy. We have hired a new special events coordinator. Her name is Ariel Altenberg, and she's out of Nashville, Tennessee. And she'll be starting on June 14th, so we're anxious to get her here to start. Also, just wanted to update you a little bit on the pavement preservation projects that are going on. We've had some delays and changes in schedules, and so I just briefly wanted to talk to you about the new scheduling. So La Cañada will have its fog seal done on this week, so May 10th through 14th. That fog seal will be done. Rancho Sahuarita Boulevard from Avenida Mitla to Pima Mine Road will be done on May 24th through 28th. Sahuarita Road will be done on June 1 through 8th. And Borrego Drive will be done on June 9 through the 10th. And that should finish us up by...
Are they going to post that, Kelly, on the town's website? I know that's come up a couple of times to kind of push the message out, for people to be aware on Facebook and things like that.
You bet. If it's not already done, I'll make sure that that's done. And I think that just kind of concludes the brief report from me.
Thanks. Anybody have anything? Gil?
Now that we're getting near the end of the COVID emergency, Green Valley is beginning to think again about a futures committee. And I will be asked to get involved with that, and we'll be doing that probably over the next few months. Just as an appraisal or an analysis of what kind of options are available for growth and development of Green Valley.
Debbie? I just had a couple things. One, Oh, Kara?
Mayor, I would just say that I appreciate all the staff that's worked through this last year, specifically the Parks and Recreation staff that has done a very creative way of keeping social media on their Facebook page and keeping the community involved. And thank you to staff for that parade along the lake, making it look aesthetically pretty and useful at the same time. And great big congratulations to all of the seniors graduating. It's been a crazy, fun senior year for them. And I'll wish them all the best of luck as they endeavors as they grow out the new role.
Thanks. And she just stole half my thunder. That's okay. No. Belated Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers that are either listening or in our presence here. Special day. I hope all of you had a nice time. I have witnessed the bridge. It really does look nice, so thanks to Park and Rec and everybody that had involvement in that. Also, I didn't make an official proclamation. I just actually, last night heard that it's National Police Week this week coming up. So kudos to our police department and all police departments for all the hard work that they do. And also congrats to it's been a tough school year, so congrats to all the students that will be endeavoring into their future. I know it's been an interesting year that we hope not to repeat. Absolutely.
Mr. Mayor, one other thought I had
Yes.
was because of COVID and the procedures being applied in Tucson, it was interesting to see the amount of use that we were receiving in our memorial park at Coyle Creek. A huge number of soccer teams coming down from Tucson youth soccer teams making use of that park. So that park has been well used over the last year.
Thanks. And just as a reminder, this is the busy time of our year with the budget season. May 24th, Monday, is our next meeting. As Mr. Mariotti mentioned, we'll be continuing with Rancho Cerrito and the Quail Creek CFP budgets. And then on June 14th, the council is scheduled to tentatively adopt the budget. And finally, on June 28th, the council will hold a public hearing and adopt the final budgets. So we'll be having meetings, the next one in May and the two in June before we go on our summer hiatus. Moving on to item number 9, which is our consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion at this time.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by aye.
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 Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Our next item is a study session where the council is given information on a specific topic. Although the council may take action on any item on the agenda, I don't anticipate the council will take action on these items. Please feel free to stay and see the presentation. And at this time, Madam Clerk, item number 10.
Presentation, discussion, and possible action regarding the town manager's recommended budget for fiscal year 2022 in the amount of $94,927,520.
Thank you. And Mr. Mariotti will be leading this discussion again. Kelly, would you like to begin? And then turn it over.
Mayor, if you don't mind, I have just a few remarks that I'd like to give. There are not many, and then we can turn to AC to give the detail of the budget. As you know, the council directs me as the manager to come up with the manager's recommended budget for the council to consider, make changes to as you wish, and then final adoption as you laid out in the schedule just a moment ago. So that's what we're here to do tonight. I want to assure you that we had a very good staff budget process. The staff is within the body of their budget work. They identified line item by line item where the budget request is relating to the strategic plan. And so they're all doing that now, which is taken a while to get there, but now they're all bought into doing this. And so that's why I can stand before the council today and let you know that our budget reflects the resources necessary to move our strategic plan efforts and goals forward. And in fact, that's what, as AC lays this out, you'll be able to see. I do want to thank our department directors for their close work within their own departments to come up with the ideas and the concepts and the strategies necessary to move things forward. I also want to thank a very confident budget team, which includes not only all of AC's staff, but Terry as well, as Terry and I and AC met with each of the department directors to go over these items. They were able to offer very good advice to our department directors, which ultimately culminated in the budget that you see. I think the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and it's readily apparent on how quickly our community is growing right now. And as a result, we see that revenues are increased by a significant amount. We see that our retail development is growing, as outlined in the resolution or proclamation that you may have read earlier on some of those growth areas within our retail especially. But also our housing continues to really explode, really. As you look at building inspections from year to year, we're up anywhere between 60 to 70% increase over last year's inspections. And so we're very busy within that department and all the departments that are associated with that. But increase in population doesn't just affect our building department. It affects our police department, it affects our courts, and it affects our roads, our streets and roads, and parks, and in our internal services as well. And so in this budget, you'll see that I'm making a request for an additional 10 FTE. And 5 of those are going to, I would recommend that we put place within the police department, and the other 5 within various departments. I think there's one in the clerks and one in streets and et cetera, and AC will lay out the details of all this. But the reason why I'm recommending that number is that we're feeling the crunch, and we need some additional help and support and additional staff. I'm recommending another market adjustment. We did one last year as well, and I'm going to recommend one this year. And that helps us stay up with the cost of living and what is occurring in the other communities as well. In addition, I'm asking in this budget for some money for a market study. And the market study, once done, will help us guide recommendations to the council in our fiscal 23 budget. So that money is in there. We also have a request for additional increases in our technology department. Some of our servers and our other technology is getting outdated and wearing out. We need to replace these pieces of equipment. One of the things that we'll see is in this room here, where we anticipate coming in and upgrading our sound system and putting in better cameras, so the people that watch the council meeting at home will be able to hear and see better what's happening here in the council chambers. We also have money in there, and this is, we've known this is needed to happen for a while, but just haven't really had the funds to put into the budget. But we need to do a renewal of our town's park, trails, and open space manual, our master plan. As you know, this is the plan that guides future development pertaining to these elements in our town. And so there's money provided in the budget to update this important master plan. We continue to upgrade the quality of our parks. We've been able to get them badly needed equipment. With additional parks coming online with Wrightson Ridge, we were needing additional tractors and mowers, and we've been able to do some of that thing. In addition, they're implementing smart maintenance techniques, and we need to cover the cost of these techniques to keep our grass green and such. There's money in the budget to bring a sewer line into Animax Park. This ultimately will lead to hooking our facilities into a sewer line instead of a septic system. In addition, we have in fiscal year 23's budget a splash pad, and this will be the line that will hook into our splash pad there at Animax Park. We're also adding quite a few shade elements to our parks, because in the summer, as you know, that leads to enjoyment for people to visit our parks in the summer especially. We anticipate building a parking lot in this budget with minor improvements to Twin Buttes, which is the 93 acres or so that we purchased not too long ago. So we'll be able to begin to use that amenity for our community. You'll also see in the budget some money that will help us spruce up our buildings. They're aging and they need some repairs and also some repaint. So we'll be repainting the exterior and some interior areas of our buildings. Our roads continue to be a top priority. So there's also a transfer from the general fund to the HERF fund of $500,000 to help us maintain the quality of our roads. As you know, the council said we want to keep our roads in the good to very good category. And this will help us do that. We have important capital projects. One of those is the completing over this fiscal year and 2023 fiscal year, completing the extension of Quail Creek Road. So that's in the budget. Not only is that important from an economic development standpoint, but important also from an emergency services standpoint to complete that project. Sahuarita Square has not been overlooked either, so we have some money in there to design the catalyst project, and if we can make it work, there'll be some money in there to design a widening of Lobby Road. Also, in this budget, you'll notice that the wastewater enterprise for the first time is in the black. So we finally reached that area where we're out of the red and into the black in our enterprise fund. But we have some very important capital projects there as well that will help us upgrade our facilities and our equipment, including a new lab. Now, it's projected that we'll use some money from the America Recovery Act to help us fund that, but you'll see that in our budget. So with that, I think I'll, with permission, Mayor, then, hand it off to AC, and he can get into the details.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
May I just make one comment? AC, I do have one concern that I wanted to put on the table right up front. I was promised we were going to have popcorn and a variety of soft drinks to go with this presentation tonight. And not seeing that, I must say that I am somewhat disappointed.
I think that actually falls on the town clerk. I'm not sure. But we have candy.
I just add chocolate.
That's right.
Be forewarned, there's an inverse relationship between the length of the agenda language, which was constructed by a finance person,
Yes.
and the length of the presentation.
Okay. And we are considered forewarned. Thank you.
All right. So, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I present to you the town manager recommended budget for fiscal year 2022, which is programmed for $94,927,520. The budget is balanced in that our financing sources are equivalent to our financing uses, with no debt to pay for any operational or ongoing items, although there is debt to pay for capital items. So you're going to hear this phrase a lot, whopping. This budget is a whopping $35.27 million more, or 59% more than the current year budget. But that's not of concern. It's a larger budget because there's more financing sources available to us. So where does that $35.27 million come from? Well, there's an increase in our debt of $23.17 million. A lot of that comes from the Registered Community Facilities District, but we are proposing a debt issuance to fund the Coyle Creek Boulevard Extension project. $8.45 million comes from more revenues. I mean, things are going great. Who would have thought, during the pandemic years that it would be as good as it has been and as we're projecting for next fiscal year. And our beginning fund balances are $3.65 million higher. So all of those are not, there's nothing in that that's bad, and so the budget is going up because of those increasing available funding sources. So the budget is many months in the making, and we usually start this process around December, January timeframe. And when we develop the budget, it's part of a 5-year plan that we put together. One of the things that we don't want to do is overcommit in any annual budget cycle. We'd hate to be put in a situation where, hey, things are going great this year, we hire all this additional staff, the 10 additional staff, only in 3 years to have to start laying people off because of what the future holds. So we really focus on financial sustainability. So we want to make sure whatever we commit to on an ongoing basis in the current year budget, we can pay for that over the next 5 years at least. We also want to avoid irrational or poor short-term decisions, and we don't want to use accounting gimmicks to try to balance the budget. And those accounting gimmicks would be highlighted in a five-year plan. Case in point, during the Great Recession years, there were techniques that were being used where people were delaying payments in June, making those payments in July, and balancing the budget in a fiscal year. Well, when you look at it from a 5-year perspective, you would see those things sticking out. So we don't want to come to you with accounting gimmicks. When we do the budget, we want to make sure that we're conservative and consistent. So we don't budget for the extremes. They're kind of interesting to consider, but we don't expect the 100-year flood event to occur within the 5-year time frame, by way of example, right? I mean, it could occur in the 5-year time frame, but we're not building that into the budget. Without the impetus to do so, we don't assume that in future years, future councils will want us to take on additional lines of service. Unless we have some sort of strategic plan that guides us in that direction, we're not going to build that into the long-term forecast. Same thing with taxes and fees. We're not presuming that future councils will increase taxes to pay for items that we're committing to in the current year budget. When we look at revenues, we use some statistical modeling to help us forecast our revenues. And when we put that together, we do it so that it's more probable that our revenues will be better than what we're projecting out over the 5 years. It's not a guarantee it will be better. It's just based off of our history, it should be more probable if the conditions remain the same. Expenditures account for predictable and manageable increases. Well, what does that mean? Well, certain things we know, right? We've got a lot of history with our expenditures, so you can almost bet for certain that your payroll-related costs are going to increase at a faster clip than probably your supply costs. So when we look at the 5-year forecast, we build those additional costs into that 5-year forecast. When we put together the budget, we don't do so in a vacuum. There's a lot of good resources out there, and we try to use as many as we can, time permitting, when we put together the budget. We also have tools and techniques that we use that bring a level of statistics and probabilities into our projections. Of course, there's always major risks when you put together a budget, and certainly a big one is the economy and inflationary impacts. And with the federal debt load as it is these days, inflation in the future is obviously a major concern, for me at least. But I'm not an economic expert, so again, we go and we read the literature and we see what the experts are saying. We go with the majority opinion on that, typically. Then we do build those into our financial models. The economy obviously impacts our revenue and expenditure projections. When we're looking at the legislature, there's a wide variety of potential impacts, and some of those come down at the last minute. All these jurisdictions are putting together the budget, and the state legislature will come up with a doozy, and you have to respond accordingly. Just a case in point on that, there were several bills that were floated this session that would mandate certain spending levels in public safety for police departments, and sort of ensure that it never goes below a certain dollar amount. So those things take some control away from local councils and local boards. There were some bills that were proposed that would restrict the use of our permit revenues, which creates these accounting nightmares that you have to contend with. Fortunately, those aren't moving through the legislature, so those risks have been abated, but, you know, they keep us on our toes, and we have to monitor that. So the state has not adopted its budget yet. Part of the House proposal, which apparently is supported by the governor, is to go with this flat tax concept, which in essence would reduce state income taxes by over $1 billion. Why is that a concern to us? Well, we share in state income tax collections, and the proposed legislation or proposed budget didn't hold us harmless from that reduction. So the potential impact of that could be up to $1.2 million phased in over 3 consecutive years. Now, if it impacts the 2022 state budget, it wouldn't affect us until the 2024 Town of Sahuarita budget because of the built-in timeline between when they collect and when they share it with the local jurisdictions. It doesn't seem like this is going to go anywhere, but it's just one of those things that, you know, they're still chewing on this, and you never know what's going to happen in the political arena, and, you know, we're already building the budget. So, but for the 2022 budget cycle, it wouldn't impact us regardless. Growth is huge for us. It's a key driver, a direct driver for many revenues, such as our construction, contracting, sales tax, sewer connection fees, building permit fees, you know, increases in assessed valuations that we talked about with the CFTs. Major revenues are contingent upon our growth assumptions, so we try to be conservative when we put together the amount of new housing and new commercial development that's going to occur. And I'll just give you an example. By the end of the current fiscal year, we're expecting around 574 homes to be permitted. In the budget, we assumed 340 homes. Now, we were kind of shrinking that number down because of COVID, and we knew that there was some uncertainty, although we were cautiously optimistic moving into the, you know, the COVID budget, if you will. But we're coming in significantly above what we projected. So lo and behold, our revenues are way up, right? Especially in those direct revenues that are tied to growth. But if the reverse is true, then you have the reverse problem, right? So for this upcoming budget year, we're assuming that 553 homes are going to be permitted. So it's slightly less than what we're experiencing in the current fiscal year. It's a 2.5% growth rate, which is not exorbitant growth, but it's still healthy growth. And we feel comfortable with that number just because we look at what's on the shelf. We talk to the development community. We see these developers and home builders, you know, buying up all this land because inventory's low. So we're optimistic about that figure, but, you know, if something happens during the year and we don't reach that number, then those revenues are going to fall short. So there's a lot of risk associated with that because those are fairly significant revenue sources. And obviously with growth, we've got more people, which means more overall money to spend locally, and which also means more state shared revenue. And, you know, we do have the concern about home prices. How's that going to affect, you know, how's home affordability going to affect future growth, as well as rising interest rates. So we're just cognizant of that, but we think the number that we have is a cautiously optimistic number that we can achieve. All right, so before we start looking at the 2022 budget, we have to understand how the current fiscal year is wrapping up. So when we've all sat down, we've looked at our expenditures, we've forecasted our revenues out through the end of this fiscal year. If you compare our ending fund balances, our estimated ending fund balances for the current fiscal year, and you compare that to the 2021 adopted budget, we're $7.7 million favorable compared to that. So the surplus is above what was budgeted for, which, you know, nothing like a global pandemic to really spur on and give you a local boom in your economy, you know. We were optimistic moving into, you know, cautiously optimistic moving into the 2021 year, but certainly wouldn't have anticipated that.
AC, talking about the pandemic, didn't mean to interrupt, but have we been able to track our online sales? Because I know the Wayfair kicked in, whatever that bill was, we able to distinguish, did we get some benefit, some major benefit, from that online sales that now you get to collect the tax revenue at the local level?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, yeah, there is a special tax code that the businesses that our online retailers use when they file their taxes. So we can identify the amounts. Now, it's not clear how much of that is an increase because this was a newly created tax code. Some of those businesses were using the old tax code. But regardless, yes, it has had a favorable impact to our local economy.
Thanks.
Yeah. And not to mention, I think with the pandemic, we're seeing more people shop closer to home.
Right.
Which means there's less sales tax leakage. We offer more commercial services and products here locally that you don't necessarily have to go into Tucson anymore to get. So all of that has helped us out quite a bit. And I should also mention that with the pandemic, that people weren't able to use their disposable income for a lot of services because services require contact with others. So in lieu of that, some people have bought goods instead, which are taxable. So this is such an extremely favorable position, we should take advantage of this. And what do I mean by that? Well, why don't we use a portion of that to pay off some debt, right? And not debt in the traditional sense, but unfunded pension liabilities in our public safety personnel retirement system. So if you look at the latest actuarial report, we have unfunded liabilities of $3.91 million. So the town manager recommended budget, it does even though it's in the current fiscal year, but it affects our beginning balances for next year, assumes that the council will approve this idea. At the next council meeting, we're going to come to you with a budget amendment to take $3.91 million of our available ending fund balances in the general fund and use it for this particular purpose. Well, why would we do that? Because unfunded liabilities are essentially debt, and it's debt at an interest rate that costs us 7.3%. Right? If I keep the money in the bank, I'm lucky if I earn 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd rather not earn 1% and not have to pay 7.3%.
And AC, can I make a quick comment on that? For my colleagues, I'm the chair, which I didn't realize until I became mayor, of the PSPRS system for this unfunded liability. And I can tell you what, there are communities in Arizona, I don't know how they're going to dig their way out of this. They've got themselves in such a hole, and it's legislatively required that we do this. Now, some of it's how we got here was the investments by the pool, and we've got a very strong committee, PSPRS committee, especially if we have a retired judge on there that is always watching very diligently what they're doing at the state level. But I just wanted to mention that I would certainly support this because if we get in such a hole, which other communities are, especially older communities, I don't know what they're going to do. I mean, literally, they could go bankrupt. But I don't know what that means either. So I just wanted to say it's something that I didn't have a great knowledge of until I was appointed to the PSPRS local board, but it's something to be concerned for.
Yeah, and if you look at our funding ratio in the plan, we're 82% funded, which is considered really good.
Right.
There are jurisdictions that are in 20-30% range.
Right.
But even at 82% funded, we still have $3.91 million of unfunded liabilities. That goes to tell you how big the problem is statewide. So some of the financial information on that is by making this payment, because we're obligated to pay for those unfunded liabilities, and they're projected to be paid off over the next 15 years. For the fiscal year 2022 budget, by making this payment, it would save us $270,000 in costs. So if, as a council, you decide not to do this, then I'm going to have to increase the police department budget for pension contributions by $270,000. We won't have a choice in that. Also, over the course of 15 years, it will save us $6.5 million. And that's an hefty chunk of change. So it'll make hiring new officers more affordable. In that way, hopefully the new officers, the pension contributions that and the existing officers who are going to pay for, the accumulated unfunded liabilities, we're only only going to be paying for the normal cost of retirement, theoretically. Now, there's a bunch of assumptions in the actuarial reports, and those change over time, but this would bring us up to 100% funding level. So I propose to you that this is a great thing that we have an opportunity to take advantage of and should move forward on.
And AC, I might also point out that fund balance is such that we have excess, a lot of excess in our fund balance. The council, I remember when I first got hired here 8 years ago, the council said one of the goals that we're after is to build up our fund balance by $10 million. We want to call that an opportunity fund. You remember those terms? Well, we're past that point, and we're only 8 years into that 10 years, so we're way past that point. So I think our fund balances are such, and this is where AC really had to talk to me too. It's like, well, okay, what's going to be the return on our investment? I guess you could call it that. We have to do it.
Right.
And do we have the money to afford to do it? Well, the answer was the return on investment is a savings, a substantial savings over time, and we do have the cash to do it. So I would also obviously recommend that we take these steps and get this paid down.
So there you have the concept. As I mentioned, we'll be coming back to you in 2 weeks with the budget amendment to move forward with this. And there will be a representative from the PSPRS Pension Trust that will provide you with a presentation and be available to answer any questions that you may have about that. So hopefully that's a good thing. But even with that taken out, you still see our surpluses over what we had budgeted at $3.79 million. It's been a great year for us. Okay, so if we look at fiscal year 2022 and we look at where the money comes from to pay for all the items in the budget, new revenues, which would include governmental taxes, charges for services, licenses, and permits, and other revenues, account for $41.9 million of the total budget, about 45%. New debt represents $23.2 million, or nearly a fourth of the budget. And beginning balances, which are our savings from current fiscal year that will roll over to next fiscal year, at $29.7 million, or 31% of the budget. If the council ultimately decides not to move forward with the $3.91 million contribution to PSPRS, then that $29.7 million will go up by almost $4 million. So it needs to be better understanding of the impacts. Intergovernmental revenues represent our state share of the capital grants. That's $16.7 million. Taxes represent our construction contracting taxes, our general fund sales taxes, and franchise fees, as well as the CFD property taxes. That makes up 16% of the budget, $14.8 million. And the highlight here is that there are no changes being recommended to our tax rates or taxing structures. Charges for services represent sewer user fees, our central service cost allocation, development and plan review fees, recreation fees, things of the like. Those come in at $5.5 million. Licenses and permits would be our building permit revenues, sewer connection fees, various public works permit fees. That comes in at $3.1 million, and then the other category at $1.6 million, and that's where we would account for investment income, court fines, and anything else that would be classified under those other classifications. Okay, so this slide will give you a sense of how our local economy is projected to do next fiscal year. And I mentioned whopping, and I've probably used that a few times. Total revenues compared to current fiscal year budget of $41.9 million. This is an increase of $11.6 million, or 38%. Now, this does not include the contingent revenues that we budgeted for in the current fiscal year. If I had included those, it would be a fourth classification. If you recall, in the current fiscal year, we did reduce our revenues to account for potential impacts of COVID. So it's skewing things a little bit here. So when we look at our local revenues, you see a 37.9% increase. Last year's number was deflated a little bit for, it's a little less than 10%, but approximately 10% for the potential COVID-19 impacts that never materialized. still, even if you factor for that, we're still looking at, 27.9% growth in our local revenue sources. These local revenues would account for things that the town council has influence on. So it's going to be those charges that would be included in our town code, town ordinances, or any of our policies that you adopt. So to give you a sense of things, because there's a lot of revenue sources that fall under that local category, let's see, we've got license and permit revenues increasing by $1.2 million, 64% increase in that revenue source. Contracting taxes, a $1.7 million increase, 51% higher. Sales tax and franchise fees in the general fund, $2 million higher, 31% more. CFD property taxes, 32% higher, equating to $330,000. Sewer user charges, $814,000 higher, 23% increase. Not because we're increasing rates, just because to account for all the growth and utilization of the services. So, it's very good. Looking at intergovernmental operating revenues, these would be our state shared revenues, so we collect a portion of the state's income taxes, a portion of the state's fuel taxes, a portion of the state vehicle license taxes, and a portion of the state sales taxes. Those are accounted for in this classification, as well as some of our operating grants, like the Operation Stone Garden grant, which is for overtime. That would be included here. So the number that I've given you for fiscal year 2022 is incorrect. I have 16.7 million. A better number would be 12.96 million. And the reason for that is because the number that you see here includes $3.75 million of funding from the federal government for the American Rescue Plan Act, so the ARPA funding. So I initially included it in this category because it could be used to offset any revenue losses. It could be used to offset things like premium pay for employee staff if they're working on COVID-related issues. Well, you've seen that our local economy is booming, so we don't have any revenue lost as a result of the pandemic. So what we're proposing in this budget is not to use the ARPA funding for ongoing operations, but instead to use it for capital purposes. So I would have been better, it could have been classified here, but given how we intend to use it, it would be better to classify it under capital contributions. So if we adjust for the 3.75 million and take the 12.7 million down to 12.96 million, that would be a 9.5% increase over last year. And the state's economy is also doing better, not as much as our local economy, but it is doing better. And we're going to have more state shared revenues because our population is growing at a clip that's faster than the statewide average, which means we're going to collect a larger proportion of the pool of money that's available, and that pool of money is growing. So that bodes well for our intergovernmental operating revenues. Capital contributions, again, you see $1.1 million here. That should be $3.75 million higher for that ARPA funding. That would bring that number up to $4.93 million, which is a 388% increase over the current fiscal year. And again, that's because of the federal government bailing us out, even though we don't need to be bailed out. Okay, so if we look at our funding uses, so this is how we plan to spend the money that we have. The largest portion is for ending fund balances. 44% of the total, $42.1 million. So when Kelly talks about having a lot of ending fund balances, there you go. Now, not all of that is available for general uses. Some of it's restricted, and we'll cover that a little bit later. But that's a big number. On a budget that's $94.9 million, to have 44% of that in ending fund balances is a lot. Operations, $28.2 million, which represents 30% of our total spending. The capital is 17%. The capital budget is $17.2 million, 18% of the total budget, and debt service represents $7.3 million, or 8% of the total budget. If we drill down a little bit more into that debt service wedge, and we look at that, you see that $7.3 million is for debt service, $4.26 million is for debt principal, $2.2 million for interest on the debt. Bond issuance costs are $800,000, and there's small amounts for banking and trustee fees. The budget does assume that we'll issue new debt next fiscal year. I mentioned the excise tax obligation for the Coyle Creek bridge that we're building in the Coyle Creek Boulevard Extension project. $6.44 million. We're tentatively looking at a 15-year term on that, but I have to work with our financial advisor. And all this stuff is going to come back to you, but we're building this capacity into the budget. And that would pay for the construction of that particular project. We talked about the Rancho Cerrito Community Facilities District issuing nearly $16 million in general obligation bonds, and we're going to acquire about $860,000 worth of new vehicles next year with our lease program that we have with Enterprise. So this is a $1.96 million increase over the current fiscal year. Looking at the capital budget, which is programmed for $17.2 million. This is a $12.25 million increase over the current fiscal year. Most of our capital projects and vehicle acquisitions were deferred in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We no longer have the same amount of uncertainty and concerns that we did heading into this year's budget, going into next year. So we're pretty much reinstituting our capital plan full force. So that accounts for the significant increase in the capital budget. Kelly's touched on a lot of the projects already, so I'm not going to belabor that. And we have a slide later on in the 5-year CIP that will also cover some of these. But within the capital budget includes things that aren't capital improvement plan for the town, and that would be the infrastructure acquisitions that the Rancho Cerrito Community Facilities District has budgeted. So those will be just purchases of infrastructure that the master development builds. That's in for $8.46 million and falls into that general governmental category. And then the capital budget does pay for 1.8 full-time equivalent employees and some indirect costs are built into that budget. Okay, if we look at our non-capital operations budget at $28.2 million, the largest portion, and this is very common in governmental entities, is for personnel costs. So that's programmed at $16.88 million, 60% of the total operations. That provides funding for 167.7 full-time equivalent personnel. Services come in the second largest component at $7.1 million, 25% of the total operations. We have supplies at $1.4 million, 5% of total operations, and other costs at $2.7 million, or 10% of operations. So this chart shows you the changes in staffing levels and fund allocations for the year. And I've only included departments that have changes, and those are the ones that are displayed on this slide. So if we start up at the top, you see the town manager department actually has a total FTE change of 0. However, there's some changes going on in there, just next to 0. In the current fiscal year, the town manager department added a management analyst position, or management assistant position, I'm sorry. So that added 1 FTE. So how do we get to 0? The procurement function, which has formerly been under is currently under the town manager's department. And we're proposing to shift that over to the finance department. So there's 1 FTE associated with the procurement function, so that will transfer over to finance. And Mr. Mayor, that should free up an office.
Oh, thank you.
I might get that back sometime in the future.
She's kept it much nicer than I have, though, so I'm good with that.
The municipal court is adding 1 FTE, and that's for a court clerk. The Department of Law, we're recommending a decrease of 1 FTE for the deputy town attorney position. The finance department has an increase of 2 FTE. That includes the 1 procurement person transferring over, as well as the addition of an office assistant, and half of the office assistant's time would be in the procurement function. We need more support there, and the other half would be for the other 3 divisions in finance. Human Resources is adding a position, an HR analyst. The Planning and Building Department is adding a building inspector, although that's occurred this fiscal year already. And this is just to meet the demand. They're so busy that they needed to happen. Parks and Recreation Department, actually I should relabel this as the Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Division, and we'll cover that in just a little bit. But Parks is asking for an additional .3 FTE, and these would be seasonal rec aides to help with the parks programs. Police Department, we're proposing the addition of 5 FTE. That would include a police lieutenant, 2 police officers, an executive assistant, and a crime scene specialist. You'll notice that the general fund has an addition of 6 FTE, and the grants and restricted sources fund has a -1 FTE. If you recall, we had COPS grants funding that were approved in previous years. Well, that funding pays for basically 50% of an officer over 3 years in total. And and after that, you need to absorb those costs moving forward. So we're starting to see that transition occur. So the general fund absorbs 6 FTE costs. We're adding 5 to the department. The Public Works Department is sort of an umbrella department, which includes engineering, administration, streets, and wastewater. You see some allocation changes going there, and a lot of that is just the department head's projection of where the workload is going to be based off of our operational plan and our capital plan. In total, Public Works is asking for 1 additional FTE, and that would be a facilities worker. And we've got more facilities to manage. The facilities that we own are aging, and we need more assistance there. So in total, it's a increase of 10.3 FTE, as Kelly said. That would bring our total staffing levels to 167.7 full-time equivalent employees. If you look at this on a per capita basis, this is 5.07 FTE per 1,000 population. We haven't been at that level since 2012. And actually, our peak year was back in 2003 when we had 8.43 FTE per 1,000 population. So.
AC, question. Planning and building, that is a very active area, and not objecting with the FTE, but do we have other methodologies that we can use to take care of the workload in there other than FTE?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we have contracted services. So one of the things we don't want to do is you don't want to budget your FTE for the peak load.
Right.
Because when you do that, when that peak load's not there, then you're at the point.
But we will be able to cover the expanded of the peak period.
The budget should be able to accommodate
Great.
the peak period.
Thank you.
553 homes. I mean, if we get to 1,000, we may come back and talk, right? But it's all based off of the assumed growth rate. So yes, at that assumed growth rate, we should be able to manage it with the budget we have.
Well, they're pouring in from the coast, so my God, who knows?
I don't know that that would be a bad problem to have.
No, it's not.
So with that, we have a little bit of a transition here because we did want to talk about police department staffing issues. I don't know if issues is the right term.
Opportunities.
Opportunities. And so with that, I'll turn it over to the police chief and Jessica, our HR director.
And if I could just interject while you're getting seated, this is something that Kelly and I had discussed, and I had asked to get an update from the chief on where we are and where we're going. Over the last couple of years, I've just had a sense, but it's just a sense from talking to other mayors that I thought we were probably under-policed from a staffing perspective. And just ironically, I was asked to participate with the Southern Arizona Leadership Council just a week or so ago about incorporation, kind of a different subject, but one of the slides was from the county, from police staffing for our communities. And as an example, Oro Valley is at 2.95 per 1,000 residents. Miranda's at 2.42. South Tucson, ironically, is at 3.87. Tucson is at 2.09. We're at 1.85. So I just thought this was just timely, so I wanted to hear from my colleagues on, I've always said, and I'm only one of 7, if we're not a safe community, and maintaining that, I think is much harder to do to claw back if we lose it. So with that, I had asked if we could hear what's going on. And again, just a week or so ago, that I heard the city of Tucson gave a pretty substantial raise starting. So if you could interject that, I don't know what it is, but Jessica may know. And I know we probably I know comparative communities is interesting. I mean, you know, Flagstaff can be whatever, but does someone leave here and go to Flagstaff? I'm not so sure about that. But our, you know, Pima County, the Marana, Oro Valley, you can commute from here. So just that vigilance that I wanted to, you know, have everybody know, you know, on that, and just get council's thoughts as we move forward.
And hopefully we're looking at the changing conditions along the border as well.
Well, and yeah,
We've
exactly.
seen a couple of those things pop up in the last 10 to 12 days.
We got a helicopter landing in Green Valley.
Yeah.
So I hadn't even anticipated that when I'd asked for this sort of breakout during the budget session, but to Councilmember Lutz's point, it's ever changing. I just don't want to be behind the power curve. Chief?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, and council members. Thanks for the opportunity to speak with you about staffing. I'm going to provide an overview, and I'm going to follow my notes to stay on task here. Provide an overview of how the police department comes up with recommended staffing, and I'll leave time for questions that you all may have. After I'm done speaking, I believe Director Silver will come up and have some discussion as well. So like other departments here in town, the police department provides services through equipment, technology, and obviously personnel. The proposed PD budget will assist us with providing quality service and help us achieve our mission of making Sahuarita a safe place to live, work, and play. This recommended budget provides for equipment, technology, and personnel. Some of the technology and equipment you've already seen up on slides. However, the bulk of this is personnel. Personnel clearly provides service. However, before I begin commenting on the positions, I want to state that we also leverage help through our relationships and agreements with other law enforcement agencies and other town departments and organizations, both governmental and non-governmental. For example, we have our volunteers in police services, our Arizona Rangers. We have a number of relationships with other agencies and organizations that sometimes include formalized IGAs. With that, this budget includes requests for new sworn and civilian PD positions. These are positions designed to provide direct service to residents, as well as important administrative work that's going to assist us with projects and programs that will also deliver service to our residents in our community. Without these positions, there will be some tasks that will not be able to be completed, and other tasks that will be delayed or done with significantly less efficiency. Some of the criteria we look at when evaluating staffing needs are how does the staffing support our mission of making Sahuarita a safe place to live, work, and play. Short of staffing, can it be done differently, either through technology or different types of equipment? Where does the work that will be done by additional staff rank amongst priorities? So in a very simplistic way, from the police end of this, crimes against persons are typically almost always going to outweigh crimes against property. However, I want to also state that we also recognize that too little attention to the, quote, lesser crimes, that's in air quotes for you, such as vandalism, petty theft, disturbing the peace, traffic issues, will degrade our quality of life here in town. And these will actually increase those types of crimes as well as more significant crime. Personnel are the primary resource for addressing that type of service that tries to solve that issue or reduce those types of crimes. We also look at the number and types of incidents or calls for service that the police department is dealing with, as well as on-view activity as officers are out on patrol coming across different things. So some of the incidents take a single employee 2 minutes to handle. Other ones take an employee 2 hours to address. And sometimes we're dealing with something that requires multiple days of investigation by multiple employees, or as we have experienced here easily in the last 2 or 3 years, different incidents that take multi-month investigations to solve. And I also want to say that while some agencies do, the SPD does not assign a tracking number, a report number, however you want to think of that, to every incident or task that we handle. It's done by design. Looking at or just the number of calls will not reveal how busy we are. I can tell you that staff is busy and that we need patrol and community service, community policing time, and that's only going to be handled by staff. I don't want to be that police department that responds to calls for service only. Call 911 will show up. Call for anything else, we'll let you know when we can get there. Community policing is a priority for the Espd, and we continue to look at opportunities to enhance our community policing. Being truly connected to the community provides us working relationships with the community, so that we know them and they know us. We need to continue our community policing efforts, and this requires time that staff spends with the community, developing and maintaining relationships. This is done primarily through employees. The question of how much staffing does the police department need regularly comes up. I've seen this over my 37 years. And it's been of particular interest in different jurisdictions nationwide now for the last couple of years. There's also an additional question that needs to be asked: what do you want your police department to be able to do? If you want them to simply respond to 911 calls, the urgent stuff, and nothing else, you need less staff. But with that, my answer to that question, what do you want them to be able to do, is, again, our mission: make Sahuarita a safe place to live, work, and play. To meet this mission, it obviously requires staffing and more than that can just respond to 911 calls. Police departments, to include the Espd, do not respond to all policing requests. Come over and take care of this issue. That's unrealistic. In some incidents, let's face it, are not policing issues. But we often refer another source to folks to help solve issues. However, to maintain our quality of life, calls for service need to be handled in a timely manner. But we must also be able to provide adequate patrol time in neighborhoods to reduce crime or deter crime, and practice quality community policing. These positions will be vital to our mission and will assist us, the five that AC has already brought up. I am going to take a moment and comment on recruitment, retention, and morale, as these have roles in staffing. The morale created by the town and the police department is good. We train our officers well. We recognize accomplishments and quality work through our employee recognition program, not only the one the town does for all employees, but also internally with the police department. I'll take a moment to comment that on our last community survey, we were fortunate to receive a 94% positive rating from our residents, and obviously I think we all want to see that continue. And again, this requires staffing to continue our positive community policing efforts. I believe the high positive rating, from my perspective, is clearly attached to our interaction with residents in settings such as, but not limited to, Fiesta, Pecan Festival, 4th of July, National Night Out, Shop with a Cop, Coffee with a Cop, Madeira Highlands Hometown Heroes events, and many others. Spooktacular, I'm missing some, thank you, Parks and Rec, but several of them. These efforts take staffing, but while they are good for the public, they are truly good for our officers. When they can get out there and connect with the public, our residents, the people we actually serve, in a non-enforcement manner, it regenerates them. It's good for morale for the officers, as opposed to, why do everybody I contact, I seem to have to either investigate or interview or possibly arrest. So it's good to have us involved in it. I will state that over the last 2 years, policing has become more difficult in regards to what officers are to address and how they are to address different types of incidents and tasks. Officers have, this is the low point here that I'll talk about, but it's the elephant in the room. Officers have been physically attacked, killed, and even assassinated at higher rates nationwide, and this includes here in Arizona. My morning band is off today because we just finished burying an officer this weekend here in Arizona. Some community leaders, and I want to make it clear, none of you, thank you, and often people from outside our community create situations where the accurate information about a police incident can't be disseminated. There's simply not enough bandwidth. We can't get our message out quick enough. Or the people that receive the message don't agree with it, don't want to agree with it, won't accept actual factual information. There is nothing wrong with evaluating police performance. It's a necessity. That's how we get better. But too often the speed of highly inaccurate information and professional media and social media, they create this additional challenge for us, and is damaging to our communities. We could list dozens. None of this is lost on my officers at any rank. This impacts us here in Sahuarita and communities nationwide. Defund, reform, rethink, redesign, reimagine, replace, or flat out get rid of the police is so political that it frequently becomes a point where different points of view, legitimate different points of view, are drowned out. You can't have the conversation. People are yelling. And this obviously continues to impact recruitment and retention and morale, to include my department. So I'm thankful for a great community. That means our residents. I'm thankful for our leaders, such as yourselves, who are willing to evaluate, listen, evaluate, and then make decisions. I'm also thankful to our employees who throughout 2020 answered the call over and over and over and over again. And that includes employees of different town departments. The police department does not do this on their own, such as the help we get from HR, from Park, from Public Works, etc. So we can't do it alone. And our staff townwide is answering that. As a police department, we know we're not perfect. We make mistakes. We're willing to learn. And that's what's going to make us a better organization. It makes us more efficient, more effective. Recruitment and retention have different elements. So this goes to staffing. Yes, officers and civilian employees want good pay and benefits. Pay and benefits are a significant part of an employee's decision to work at any organization. What does it pay? What are the benefits, etc. They have to be truly competitive, and I know the manager has placed money into this budget to conduct a market survey for all town positions and not just the police department, and this will help us. You mentioned Tucson's movement, and the market survey may be perfectly timed out to address other issues. Additionally, support from our leaders helps, and I know our council has supported the police department and all town departments here, and that is well received. Our folks know you support us, and I thank you for that. I requested in the budget, and the manager, thank you, Mr. Udall, agreed to enhance our training budget to make sure our officers have the right skills when we're out dealing with different incidents. Training requirements can change quickly, and most often they increase, they don't decrease. They rarely ever become obsolete. And I'd like to mention some of our current training, but these are things that we've been doing now, we're setting in place now for a while. Verbal, basically how to de-escalate somebody's agitated state through communication and not physical skills. Emergency Spanish for law enforcement, verbal, visual, and physical de-escalation training that we've been doing now. A variety of trainings that emphasizes best practices that fits us here in this area. Training in investigation, supervision, leadership, traffic safety, traffic investigation, first aid, case law and statutory updates, interpersonal skills, and many other types of training. I think everybody here is aware it takes about 12 months to get a rookie police officer trained through an academy, and that's if we hit all dates right in a row. We have them ready to enter an academy when it's opening, before they're able to handle a call for service on their own without an FTO, a training officer in the car with them. It takes about 4 months at top speed to get a lateral officer. A lateral is one that comes to us with prior experience, to the point where they are out on their own. So when we're planning ahead, we have to realize there's a delay in the person who's in the car, out meeting the public, out doing different things. And this includes our recruitment for testing, background, medical and psychological testing, the academy, which is typically about 5 months right now, post-academy training, and then the field training officer portion. So now I come to the positions that AC has pointed out. And they're not in any particular order, and I want to thank Mr. Udall for working through the budget process, including positions requested by the PD. I know police officer positions are expensive. So it's 1 lieutenant, 2 police officers, 1 executive assistant, the crime scene specialist. And in very short, the lieutenant will provide us with much needed supervision for patrol sergeants. This will help us coach, train, and mentor. It'll tie into our succession planning and help our sergeants develop skill sets which we don't currently have. The 2 police officer positions will be placed on our busiest patrol squads. Those will be in the evening watch, or most people think the evening before gray doors comes on. And they'll help us to a small degree with community policing efforts, as we'll have more staff to address issues and not simply stomp and put out fires, but actually try to solve it so it doesn't keep coming back up. The executive assistant will work for me and the 2 commanders, dealing with a number of administrative duties with personnel, projects, and programs. I've got a list here, I'll save them for you. And then the crime scene specialist will help us in property and evidence section, or the property and evidence section, as well as crime scene processing, deal with our either moderate to major incidents. They'll take on property and evidence backlog that will always run. That position is not filled. So with that, I think I'll stop and leave the rest at least to Jessica, and then stay up here in case you have questions.
Question, Mayor?
Yes.
More of a comment, really, sorry. What you can do to best protect the future of law enforcement here in our community is to use the resources that we hope to give you to your best advantage and to continue the strong programs that you're developing and putting in place. The biggest concerns that I have as a councilman, totally out of my control, is the loss of local policing authority to national standards, which have no bearing at all in our future, but that is something that is being discussed more than I care to think. And the other thing is that if indeed the Congress creates a state out of the District of Columbia, law enforcement nationally is going to be tremendously impacted because of the politics and the nature of law enforcement in Washington, D.C. And I'm familiar with that down to the National Capitol Police and to the other agencies that coexist at the present time. That is going to create havoc. And that's why I'm sure we're going to continue to give you as much support as we can to develop a strong program, because we're going to have to depend on that in the future with the things that may, hopefully not, be coming down the track. And I just wanted to thank you, Chief, for doing an excellent job.
Thanks. And I'll have a couple of questions for you, Chief, but I think it's best, because I don't know what you're going to say, let Jessica go, and then we'll go amongst all of us and follow up with some questions.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Chief has made a lot of really important points that are worthy of consideration. From the human resources perspective, our biggest challenge is recruitment and retention. And the Chief touched on some of what I have to say, so please bear with me, it may be a little bit repetitive. The current environment of the policing profession, as you all may know, makes recruiting the next generation of police officers more difficult than ever on a national level. And this is not due to any one particular issue, and it affects agencies of all types, sizes, locations all across the United States. With the pressures, demands, and expectations of the community, finding individuals who want to step into and stay in a policing career can be a daunting task. And this is particularly true when a variety of societal, political, and economic forces are simultaneously at play. This is not to say that we can't recruit. We can, and we are. And we are receiving applications for police officers, but the pool appears to be shrinking. Some individuals that do apply get disqualified in backgrounds, and often related to drug use. As society increases its tolerance of the use of marijuana and other drugs, more and more young people are engaging in behaviors that ultimately keep them from a law enforcement career. Additionally, as the Chief mentioned, and as Mr. Mayor mentioned, agencies in regions like ours, where there are multiple law enforcement agencies that are geographically close to each other, we all find ourselves competing pretty fiercely for attracting and securing the best candidates for the job. So how do we attract and recruit? There are a lot of different ways that we can do this. We can revamp our recruitment campaigns, we can do web-based outreach, we can post flyers.
we can focus on compensation. And as Mr. Udall and the chief mentioned, that there are multiple jurisdictions in the area who have altered their compensation plans to include police for this upcoming fiscal year. And Mr. Udall has built into the proposed budget funding for a market study for all employees so that we can remain competitive with other jurisdictions in the region in the next fiscal year. Since the chief said much of what I was already going to say, there's not a lot I have left. As far as retention, I pulled information from the last 3 years, and it doesn't appear that we have a glaring problem that needs to be solved, other than getting in new people. Their officers leave for a variety of reasons. Some people do go to other agencies, some people retire, some people decide that policing is just not for them, and then others leave for personal reasons. But it seems to be that the majority of the officers that we attract and we recruit tend to stay with our agency. I don't know if that's going to change now that there are other compensation factors in other agencies, but for the most part, we're doing a pretty good job retaining our officers. We just need to get qualified people to apply.
I mean, before we have done the market analysis, do you have a inkling kind of from looking at it quickly, where we stack up against Oro Valley, Marana, and I know TPD obviously has put a little bit of a wrench into it.
They sure have.
Just to give us an idea.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as far as where we are compared to Marana, our starting police officer in the town of Saudita, not a recruit, but a rookie officer, minimum pay is $23.30 per hour.
Okay.
In Marana, it's $23.84 per hour. In Oro Valley, it's up to $24.30. So it's not a huge disparity. We seem to be pretty on par with those two agencies. But like you said, TPD just threw a whole wrench in the whole thing. They are now starting at over $26 per hour.
Right, but didn't they have an incredible loss in officers also over this last year and a half?
They have had a lot, yeah.
So their recruitment is a little more dramatic and dire, I think. So there's a reason for that. I don't know that we can judge ours on that with that skewed information too.
Yeah, I guess my concern was when they do it, if Oro Valley or Marana or our like communities do it, where will we be? So probably timing-wise to do the analysis is timely to try to figure out, where that is. Because I know typically we've probably done pretty well in historical terms getting from, at least from the events that I go to, from Pima County Sheriff and from TPD, and that was probably why they did do that, to try to stem some of that loss. Because they can come to us or we can go to them, and you don't have to necessarily move to get that job.
Right, we have a lot of agencies in a very small area.
Right.
And a qualified candidate can pick and choose where they want to work.
Right.
Because all law enforcement agencies are hurting for officers.
Right. And that's just kind of where I was concerned a little bit from there. Do you have any questions? I had a couple for the chief. Do you have any questions for Jessica?
Just a quick question, actually, I have a few. What's our staffing level right now in the police department? Do we have openings?
We do. We currently have 3 openings: the animal control officer, which we're recruiting for, 1 police officer position, and then what will turn into be another police officer position with Commander Lopez here retiring here just a couple weeks ago. So that's 3.
And we have 2 in the academy. Okay. We're obviously not on the street.
That will will backfill those positions, or?
No, that just puts, with the open position, or with the 3 open positions and the 2 in the academy, that would equal the total number of positions that we have available right now. So they count as 2 field officer positions, even though they're not actively patrolled.
So we're still down
3.
We're still down 3.
Yes.
So we're still up.
Yes.
No, 6.
3 more sworn and 2 more civilian, yes.
From there. And I use it on the roads as well. I come from the SEERS, the good, better, best sort of philosophy. in your mind, Chief, you know, if AC could wave that magic wand and make more money appear than we already are doing, from a professional's perspective, you know, and I've looked at some other towns, where would you, if money wasn't an object, you know, what would be something, a good, a better, or a best? Was the 5 the number that you requested, or was it, because I know all apartments request things, and then the manager has to weigh them out, you know, and kind of figure out what we can balance out.
Yeah, I'm sure all departments request, and then the manager has a tough job of figuring out what's actually doable. So I presented some options. The option closest to what we're looking at right now was, I guess you could call a good, and it had one additional position in there, which was a civilian position. Civilian positions are less expensive than sworn. I could make an argument, and then people could agree or disagree about how many more officers to hire. However, if all of a sudden you all said, give them 10 more cops, I can't hire 10 more cops in the next year. So it's going to be money sitting on a shelf that never gets utilized. So there was an additional position. I think it was an admin specialist initially assigned to, or what we thought would be towards training, managing our training, and then fleet management, but we're actually talking about moving vehicles physically. We have a sergeant doing that right now. But we actually thought about it in more detail. If that position were there, we would look at it and say it would be assigned probably half time to community policing, half time to the fleet, to deal with that, to make it a little bit more efficient, a little bit more effective, enhance our community policing. So I'd love to sit there and say, hey, I need 6 more cops, and I could use 6 more cops, but I can tell you right now, I can't hire 6 cops in the next 12 months. And quite frankly, with the market survey, I don't know what impact that will have on multiple departments throughout the town and budgets. So I'd rather have a few fewer positions, and it makes it easier to retain and recruit as opposed to just give me more, give me more.
Right, so if I said, okay, we're going to give you 12, you would rather have 5 or maybe 6, and have that monetary capacity to, after the survey, to pay more? Is that what you're thinking? Or?
That makes sense to me, and I'll tell you right now, I can't make the argument for 12 cops.
Right.
I can make the argument for what I've made today. I could make an argument for a little bit more, but I'm not here making that argument. I'm here saying where we would put these positions. It will make us more effective. It will make us more efficient. Could we do a little bit more? Sure, but there's a cost to that.
Right. So I guess it's the balance of you want to keep who you have or get who you can get, like you said, not having 12. Do you anticipate, Kelly, next year, depending on how well, you probably do on all areas, you have to wait for the survey to come back, right, to determine whether, you know, we're down in police and okay in inspectors or vice versa or whatever it might be, right? We won't even know, I guess, until.
Are you speaking of the market?
Yeah, the market comparison.
I do have a sense that we're falling behind market based on what I know Oro Valley and Marana just did, and then Tucson now.
Right.
We are recommending a 3% market increase, not market, cost of living increase.
Right.
And then looking at doing some kind of market 2023.
Right.
But I do have a sense we're falling a little bit behind.
Right, yeah, I would too. Typically, other towns, do they try to target individual jobs or cost of living or a combination of both? Because I know doing a cost of living, you know, across the board brings up, you know, the rising tide lifts all boats. In your experience, is it a combination of both, or do you kind of target in on occasion?
Yeah, I mean, that's the advantage of doing a market, is you can zero in what's happening, for example, with police officers. You can really narrow that down. And police officers might need a market adjustment of, let's say, 5%, whereas commanders, for example, might need a market of 2%.
Right.
You get to see that during a legitimate market study.
Right.
Cost of living, of course, is just that. It's trying to keep even with the cost of living.
Right, not fall behind.
And that's
the general.
related to CIP and other things that are happening across the state and nation.
Right.
But I am recommending a cost of living this year, mostly because I felt it was more appropriate. One, we haven't done a study, so I didn't know what to recommend in terms of market.
Right.
And two, just maybe a little more appropriate just coming out of the pandemic than would a market. So I guess the recommendation is do the cost of living now.
Right.
And then study it and make recommendations for next year. And hopefully we can get back to doing our merits associated with our evaluation system. And we've kind of put that to the side because of pandemic as well. But, yeah, hopefully we can get back to that as well.
When I was doing kind of my analysis, I looked at 5, and I know it's a little loose. That put us at 2.0, still below the city of Tucson. Though I know it's not always an apples-to-apples comparison. 6 put us to 2.04, which still below Tucson, but getting closer. And then 8 put us at 2.1. So
you're talking officers per 1,000.
Per 1,000, yeah, officers per 1,000. So I personally didn't know if that was enough, based on where we are and not trying to fall behind any further. I guess a high number wouldn't be appropriate because we have to fill them. From that perspective, I was kind of leaning towards 6. To try to not, continually be at the bottom at officers per 1,000. But that's just my thought.
6 officers, or?
Well, 6 positions.
Yeah, all positions.
Yeah, 6 positions, because the budget had 5. And when I kind of did the quick math, it still put us at the bottom per 1,000. And again, I know it's not apples to apples, but it's certainly, I think our comparative communities, size-wise, and such are more Marana and Oro Valley, who are at, much higher percentages per 1,000. And I'm just worried because of our increasing retail, which is good. Different kinds of crime come to us. We're not that more sleepy bed in the community, but that's just my thought.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Safety is paramount, I think, and I think our officers have always done an incredible job. I think both Chief Simon and I worked side by side with a lot of the officers many times, whereas I think 6 might be optimal. I think that we're going to have to look at a multi-year increase because, as Chief said, it's not realistic. And I think it's not just in the recruitment, but it's in the training and the time that it takes away from our officers to train the new officers on the street. I think that's a difficult thing to do, and to maintain and be able to do their jobs efficiently and proficiently also. So I think Chief was probably in the best position to recommend the number that would work for him and for the department. As far as I'm going back to that market analysis. We didn't do one last year.
I'm trying to think. We might have been proposing to do a market study before the pandemic hit. Because remember, we came to the council with a complete budget, and then March, and then we came back with a skinny budget, and then the state came in with some money, so we went back to a hybrid. But we might have been proposing that. I can't remember for sure.
But we didn't do it.
But we didn't do it, is bottom line.
Last year, okay. Because when was that we did it and implemented it and bumped it? Was that 2 years ago, where we bumped everybody's salary?
Yeah, that would have been maybe 3 years
3 years
ago.
ago is what I was ACB room?
Jessica was going to answer, I think.
3 years ago, that's what I mean.
Let's ask HR.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, The information that I have is that in 2019, council approved a pay plan adjustment for 6% for all pay grades, and that resulted in all employees receiving up to 2%. So if they were below the minimum of the new pay range, they were bumped up to minimum, and if they were above minimum, they received 2%, and then employees who had earned their merit also got their merit. It wasn't, the last time that we did a market study that was done by a third party was in 2015. 2015.
Then what did we
For the
base
fiscal
that
year.
6% off, when we did that back in 2019? Because I thought that was based off the market analysis, am I not?
That I'm not positive.
I
The
mean, I
only
remember Kelly
information that I was
proposing
able
it,
to
and I
find-
remember it happening, I just don't know what it was based on.
We did do not a full-blown one, but we did enough to know where our minimums should be, and that's what Jessica was describing, so.
And I think that was done by town staff, I don't think it was a third party.
Yeah.
And it was the market study in 2015 that was done, where 50% of the increase was done in one fiscal year, and then the following fiscal year, the other 50% was implemented. So it didn't hit 1 year all at the same time.
But to Melissa's point, just to be clear, the recommendation was 6 though, right? And six positions.
Initially, with the budget process, there's different options out there, but I think what we're all talking about, or what you're talking about, Mr. Mayor, is, I requested 6, and,
I just didn't want any confusion that
That's
you
really-
requested 5.
I guess my deferring to the chief is
Right.
my opinion, is whatever the chief is recommending, and chief support,
Right.
so,
Okay. And before I forget, I'm about to let people go, but Kara, are you still on the phone?
She may be in a snowstorm.
So no, okay. I didn't want to forget her like I did before. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm certainly supporting what the chief needs, and his recommendations. As Melissa is, the reason being that, in my view, the world of law enforcement is going to be changing over the next 2 years. And I don't know how that change is going to occur, and I'm not sure what kind of positions are going to be needed to respond to those changes. And it makes more sense to me to do a multiple year approach, so that you have flexibility going forward. Because again, my impression is flexibility is going to become more and more of a thing. And spreading it out will give us a better program in the long run.
Thank you. Debbie?
Yeah, I just have a question. So in the budget for the 3 officers, does that include vehicles and the equipment that they're gonna need?
That's all built into it, so either with existing vehicles that we have, or what was normally going to be replaced. I believe it included 1 additional new vehicle. So we're stretching certain things, so.
And then you, okay. I'm
So,
sorry.
another concern that I have, when I worked for the police department, was the courts. Every time we got police officers, the courts were struggling more, because everything that police officers do funnels into the courts. So is that gonna be a concern at all for the budget, is?
Well, they added a courts person to the budget.
Right. So is that enough, though?
That was the recommendation of Judge, that we had 1 more, and so we did.
And was that recommendation before these 3 new officers, or?
It was, right, so those requests all came in at the same time.
Okay.
Yeah.
It would probably be the equivalent of the 5 positions that the chief asked, not the 6. But that's a civilian position, I think, that you were asking for the 6th one.
Yes.
So if we did that, it would increase that civilian position, not a sworn officer writing tickets going to see the judge.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I guess my only comment on this is, similar to what Mr. Luss said, is we always seem to be behind the 8 ball. You know, for hiring, I certainly agree with what's in the budget for this year. But, you know, the growth is continuing, you know, housing and stuff like that. It's almost, we have to do a 5-year budget plan. Can't we do the same with the police department to say, okay, we know we're gonna need to hire X number of officers over the next 5 years and get that planning going? Because we're gonna do a study for the next budget year.
Right.
We're not gonna know the answers until a year from now. So we're always gonna be behind the 8 ball. trying to get ahead of this. And I think as the town's continuing to grow, we need to have a better handle on it, so we're not saying, okay, let's hire some officers now, but we're still going to be behind the heels.
And that is what I hope is part of the outcome of this, that there would be a, you know, a strategy, because you just can't hire somebody like in a different department and they're on the street working right away. There's like a year lag on this that, you know, hopefully we can come out with a 3 or 5 year sort of plan for policing that would continue to grow, because then they know what to recruit and have the expectation of a sense of certainty as they move forward, that would be available.
Yeah, so, and then the only other thing is to look at some innovative ways. I know I spoke to somebody from Chandler, and they're looking at hiring retirees back into the system to do less street work, just to fill that hole, because obviously the big cities, and certainly the Phoenix area, have a huge issue going on. So I think on this market study or something for the police departments to see what everybody's doing, not just in Arizona, maybe across the country. There's got to be innovative ways to try and boost recruitment and get folks. Because obviously, if you're not getting the staff, you get that trickle-down effect.
And I would say, as we recruit, we're more likely to recruit from within Pima County than we are co-chiefs. Is it a possibility? Yes, it is. But if I look at who we've hired here in the last several years, about 20% of our current staff came from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and about 20% of our current staff came from the Tucson Police Department. That will realistically change, so recruitment, retention will be one of those things that we have to deal with.
And that's why when they do that comparative survey, to me, the locality, the localness of it is much more important to me than Cochise County or Chandler, for instance, because I don't think, you know, our opportunities are as great to pull into here, especially a starting police officer, than it is from our local region. That's my opinion on there. So,
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Just to build on that and kind of everything, and we don't, I don't mean to downplay any of the other town departments, because obviously all of our employees are important to us. But I think, unconditionally, I think we can all agree that the police officers of this whole country have been impacted by the last year and a half. And again, I think it's so important, public safety is just so important to a town and to town growth and to everything about our town. Is there something that we might need to do to now? You know, and is there something that we can do to build into the budget now to help with this? I mean, if we don't want to hire 5 people that you know are not being hired at somewhere else, that we don't want to get secondhand stuff. I don't know. I'm not saying this eloquently, but what I'm saying is there something we can do or should do now to help in this recruitment process now? If we need 5 officers now and we still have 3 positions to fill, that's a lot of positions to fill, and if we're not in a position to be competitive, how can we fix that and how can we achieve that?
How do you do that within a year, or would that not be, or would it be difficult to do not knowing what our comparatives are?
I agree 100% that we need to be competitive in our recruitment. We need to get the good ones to come here to Sahuarita. The starting wage matters. When you look at a starting wage, you also have to look then at, okay, what are one-year officers making?
Oh, yeah.
And what are our sergeants making? So there's a domino thing that HR has to look at. But I think it's a good thing to look at and see where our deficiencies are in hiring. Perhaps offering signing bonuses. There's ideas out there. We can look at those.
That we can implement with this hiring.
Do you have enough time to bring that back by?
I don't think we need to. I think we can figure that out within existing budgets, to be honest with you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I come back to the point that I made before, and that is we have a national situation going on where police work is being redefined, whether we like it or not. It's going to be redefined. And we're talking about standard police positions. Who knows what positions are going to be coming down the pike by mandate from a new national standard, which may require psychological or other kinds of people involved. I mean, this could go in any number of ways. So right now, what we're looking at is probably our best response. And we're just going to have to wait and see if, unfortunately, shoes drop, because we may have to make some adjustments, but that's going to be out years. And there's no way for us to predict that. But I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that it's out there. And like it or not, with some of these major metropolitan areas pushing, we could wind up with some various and different things, which may have to respond to, but not right now. Not right now.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Just a question, just to the chief and maybe HR. Would a signing bonus in this hiring process, is that something that you have seen in any of the other departments that are hiring, and do you think that might help in recruitment?
I've seen hiring bonuses. They help for that person that wants that initial bonus money. I've seen adjustments in tuition reimbursement, things of that nature. People value those types of things. It's a little bit longer term than the hiring bonus. So if you gave them X amount of dollars for a hiring bonus, that may be spent fairly quickly, as opposed to something that is a little bit more long term, has a little bit more value for them over months or years, things of that nature. So it's going to be competitive. It's more competitive I've seen in 37 years in multiple counties and multiple states. But I don't have the magic pill for this as far as what actually solves this. But I emphasize truly competitive, and I know the manager has indicated it as well. When we do this market survey, that whatever comes up, that we're able to compete with those people. I think the sheriff's department right now hires their deputies at $25.50, Tucson at $26.21, and that's what they started at. And those are real numbers there. And when you live in the same county, you either commute to work or back the opposite direction. That's just a reality of what we're competing.
Well, and to be clear, I didn't mean in lieu of the market survey. I meant for this hiring period, because if we do the market analysis, that won't take effect until the next budget year. So for this hiring process that we're going through right now, and the positions that we're looking to hire now, to kind of band-aid us until we get that information and those details. I just don't know, AC, is that something that we can work with in this hiring process? I mean, and I don't know who has the answer.
The answer is yes, we can do that. And no, I do not think we need to add any more to the budget to do that. We have sufficient, the budget is a financial plan. Right. We've got ways within this existing financial plan in the police department budget to move things around to make something like that happen.
And I think staff has heard, they want, we would like something this year, it might not be the end-all, be-all until we do the comparative, but I think sending that message. But then also, I think they all need a sense of certainty if we're going to go with a 5 or go with a 6, as the chief recommended. I think that's the other piece that staff needs to know to come back with a budget. I mean, I'd prefer the 6 that he asked for, but.
Yeah, I think whatever they need, with a plan for whatever we need in the future.
Yeah. Does that sound good to you, Kelly? Or do we have to vote on that?
Oh.
No, I think that's
not.
It was going to be.
I think we got the gist of
the gist of, that's what I was trying to get to.
Yeah.
Thanks. Are there any other questions for two of them? Thanks for all the hard work, and I know there's going to be more coming. You heard from some of us that, something now, a number, and then the comparative, and then a strategic plan for HR to know what kind of is a plan of attack for the next 3 to 5 years. 5, I think, is a little tough, but, I'd like probably a 3-year, so we're not doing this each year from foundation. Anything else? No. Thank you. Did you get enough rest, AC, over there?
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the break.
Go ahead.
Okay, so where we last left things, we were talking about the operational budget. So this provides it with a little bit of perspective. The total non-cap operating costs are $28.2 million. This is $1.83 million more than the current fiscal year budget, 6.9% increase. As you can see, the police department is the largest department with a budget of over $9 million. And if you go down the list there, you see streets. Again, I have Parks and Recreation, but that should be Parks, Recreation, and Community Services. Wastewater, then Finance, Planning and Building, Public Works, Economic Development, Town Manager, Court, Human Resources, Law, Town Clerk, Mayor and Council, and non-departmental. So the Mayor and Council department is no longer the lowest unless we have non-departmental that takes that mantle. But the PD has the largest budget because public safety is a critical component in our strategic plan, and that falls under the community well-being focus area. It's also our only department that's staffed 24 hours a day. Streets and wastewater departments tie directly to our infrastructure focus area. Then we have the Parks, Recreation, and Community Services department, ties into both the community well-being and infrastructure focus areas. But all departments are responsible for providing excellent customer service, which is a goal of the highly performing organization focus area. This slide shows you the year-over-year changes to the departmental operating budgets. And the departments here line up like they did in the last slide. For the most part, the changes that you see here are generally tied to staffing changes. So in the police department, you see that budget's going up about $700,000. A lot of that is tied to the 5 additional FTE that was being proposed in the manager recommended budget. There are some other changes that have taken place, some one-time costs that have affected the budget year over year. One-time costs in the current fiscal year budget that aren't in next year's budget, and one-time costs that aren't in the current year budget that will be in next year's budget. We'll cover some of those in the upcoming slides. But this is the point where I'll talk about some of those organizational changes that are referred to earlier. So I mentioned that the procurement function is moving out of the town manager department, and it's coming into the finance department. So that's about a $100,000 shift there in costs, as well as $85,000 is moving out of the non-departmental area into the finance department, and that is for our annual Arizona Department of Revenue payment that we make for their TPT administration on behalf of the town. The community services function is moving out of the non-departmental area into the Parks and Recreation Department, which is now called the Parks, Recreation, Community Services Department. And that shifted about $100,000 out of non-departmental into the Parks and Recreation budget. So if we drill down into personnel costs, you see that the budget proposes $16.88 million for the personnel budget next year. Of that amount, 70% is for salaries, wages, and overtime. So that's $11.76 million of the $16.883 million. 30% is for taxes, benefits, and other employee-related costs to the tune of $512 million. I should point out, as far as the salaries and wages are concerned, of that amount, $705,000 represents overtime, since that seems to be a question that comes up. Of the $705,000, $361,000 is from grant-funded sources, most notably Operation Snow Garden grants. The pie chart you see shows you how the personnel costs break out across the different departments, and you see that the general fund pays for the bulk of personnel costs, 85% of the costs. The Highway User Revenue Fund, 6%. Grants and restricted sources pay for 4%, and the wastewater budget pays for 5% of the personnel costs. In total, costs are increasing $1.06 million over the current year budget. This is a 6.7% increase. You see the highlights of change there. So all those staffing increases that we talked about, the 10.3 FTE change, equates to $856,000. And that's a capacity figure. So when we put together the budget, we assume that we're going to hire somebody at the midpoint of the pay range, because we don't know if we're going to get a new recruit or if we're going to get a lateral. And it also assumes that whoever we hire is going to need family medical insurance, family dental insurance. So basically, it's pretty much the most costly an employee is going to be. So the budget provides for that capacity. What happens is we typically don't hire in at midpoint, something less than that. Not everybody needs family medical insurance. So there's built-in savings there, and I think that's some of what Kelly was referring to, is there's some capacity built into these budgets. Next on the list there are cost of living adjustments at 3% that Kelly talked about. That increases the budget by $334,000. Overtime increases the budget by $237,000, and as I mentioned earlier, most of that is funded. Insurance premium changes are costing the town $113,000 more. The budget assumed a 10% medical insurance premium increase. What the broker has negotiated for us, and the town has negotiated, is 8.5%. 8.5%. So there's some built-in savings there as well. So it's not enough for me to suggest, let me retool the entire budget. Whenever you adjust payroll, it affects everything in the budget. So it's one of those things, is we've built the plan. Just because there's a dollar amount and a budgeted amount doesn't mean that you have to spend it, and we can save that money moving forward into the future, and we often do.
AC, on the overtime, taking the grant funding out, that's what it's designed for, having these extra positions, and I know they're not all sworn officers, would there be some anticipation that some of that overtime would be taken care of?
I would, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would anticipate that overtime would increase with additional staffing. That's just the way it works.
Okay, right. Forget I asked the question.
There's a mathematical equation for it, but.
You can do a regression analysis if you'd like. We build the budget with a lot of assumptions, and so year over year there are changes that occur that adjust the budget. So pay, staffing, and assumption variances actually reduce our overall budget by $276,000. Case in point, we've had a lot of officers and other people in the town, well-tenured employees, typically at the high end of the pay range, retire, and then, backfill it with somebody with that level of experience, so you have savings as a result of that. Or, as I mentioned earlier, we build a budget with capacity, and then you hire somebody that doesn't need family medical insurance. So all of those assumption changes, staffing changes, result in $276,000 less in the budget for next year. Retirement contributions, this is directly tied to the $3.91 million paying the unfunded liability portion for PSPRS. That actually will save us $270,000 in the budget. So if the council does not approve that at the next meeting, then this aspect of the budget would need to increase by that $270,000, resulting in overall retirement contribution increases.
Can I just hit a pause button?
Yep.
Can I get a feel from the council on support for that program? You keep referring to, I'm going to need to change the budget.
Right,
Can
like
I
$4
just
million.
get-
Well, I already made my position.
Right.
We need it. We're going to be in better position than probably, 80-90% of the communities in Arizona. That's where I'd like to be.
Yep.
Okay, I think we got her.
So I don't need to qualify.
You don't need to qualify.
I think we're good.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I guess, just for the record, as a recipient of public safety money, while it doesn't rate anywhere near the level of conflict of interest, I just want to on the record that I am a retiree of public safety.
Right.
Me too.
Just so that's on the record.
Okay, thanks. But probably not that exact fund.
Well, yes, it is.
Oh, it is? I thought it was only for police officers.
And firefighters.
Huh? Okay.
Firefighters have their own fund, so it is separate from police. And actually, each agency has.
It's
So
based on agency, yeah, so that's why it's not a conflict of interest.
Right, because we don't have fire departments.
and they do commingle. There is some commingling that happens for
It happens.
Yeah, so there is.
I would think mayors would have a special retirement account.
Yeah, we do. It's called zero.
That would be the elected official retirement. So, okay, the next category of costs are service expenditures. And the budget for next year is $7.16 million. Components of that include pavement management, makes up $1.29 million of that. Of course, that's a significant amount of money, and that ties directly to our strategic plan and maintaining that good to very good rating on our roadways. Street and right-of-way maintenance makes up $428,000 of the total $7.1 million. Utilities, trash, and landfill costs are $977,000. Professional services, consultation and studies and reports, $822,000. Governmental services, such as the ADOR fee I referred to earlier, inmate labor, county dispatch and county incarceration costs, and minor others, $747,000. Computer hardware and software services and support, $589,000. Equipment and vehicle maintenance and repair, $454,000. Outsourced development review, $288,000. So that goes back to the extension of our staff to be able to keep up with demand. Landscape and grounds maintenance, $253,000. Communications, which would include internet, $234,000. Bank and credit card fees, $194,000. Facility repair and maintenance costs, $170,000. And custodial services, $136,000. So that's what's actually in the $7.1 million. You see the list there that highlights the change. So some of the big changes in that would be what we talked about earlier, the Parks, Trails, and Open Space Master Plan. I have $123,000 there, but it's actually $125,000, so that's a typo on my end. This would be one half of the plan. So what we're thinking is we'll do half the plan fiscal year 2022 and the other half in fiscal 2023. So it is a one-time cost. It's sort of a one-time, two-time cost. It just has to deal more with scheduling. Municipal complex painting that Kelly talked about earlier, $95,000. That would be a one-time cost. County IGAs for public safety services, we talked a little bit about that at the last meeting. That's an increase of $80,000. Software support and maintenance, an increase of $78,000. We just have a significant reliance on our computer and software applications. There's a lot more software as a service happening these days. So instead of actually procuring the software, which would be a supply, we will be contracting out for the service, case it would be a subscription basis. So things that would fall under that would be Outlook 365, which we're in the process of transitioning to.
I think we have a question.
Yeah, just a quick question maybe for the town manager and such. Obviously, internet or town security on our internet system, IT system is paramount. Does this address this at the highest level? I noticed Kingman is still recovering from their hack.
Colonial
Pipeline is now being hacked. It'll bring the town down for several weeks if we get hacked.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it does. I think AC is actually over our IT department as well, and these guys have done a great job of coming up with strategies to keep us safe. In fact, they sent out a little red herring, and some of us got caught in that by double-clicking on, and it sent us to another one that would have been a problem for us with malware and other things, you know. So they'll periodically kind of test us to make sure that we're not opening things we shouldn't. And so they do an excellent job on training. It's part of the IT strategic plan. And we do have budget for that. But that's all headed by AC, and he may have some additional comments on that.
Yeah, actually, Kelly just recently approved the Cybersecurity Safety Awareness Program, which will include more training, which is made available by a state grant that we received now. This grant isn't sending us money, but what it's done is it's opened up a bunch of services that we can take advantage of, including this new age, newfangled type of virus security software that looks at user behavior and then flags things that are abnormal. And I mean, this is a whole new world, and it's created out of necessity. The training is going to occur, so we have some foundational training as part of this plan, and then when we send out the testers for those that fail the test, there's additional training that they can be privy to. And of course, you can always get more training if you're so inclined, but yes, the budget accommodates a lot of these things. Some of it we can manage with software and hardware. Others, it's really more about training. And so that state grant will provide an opportunity for that. So more of that. Moving down the list, we have HR consultation and studies. We talked about the market study. Park utilities, it's been hot and dry. We had a really bad monsoon season, which our water costs were well over budget, but we were able to manage it with savings in other areas. I don't know that there's a sense that it's going to be really, really wet this year, so we're planning for the same scenario, and that increased our budget by $60,000. The PAG Youth Art Program, this of course is funded through PAG, that's an increase of $50,000. Development Service Credit Card Fees, $50,000 increase. We got a lot of activity going on, and a lot of those home builders, when they come to pull their permits, are paying on credit card, so that obviously increases our fees, and we built that into the budget, pretty substantial increase there. Housing and Annexation Program, at the last meeting, Director Cassidy provided you with the housing and annexation results of the study that they did, and I know that there was concern, well, how are we going to manage all this workload and make these changes that we want? We anticipated that in the budget, and so there's a $50,000 allotment for consultation services to help with that effort. We have a new facility on board, the Samtec facility, and so whenever you have a new facility, you have additional costs to maintain that facility, so that's an increase of $46,000. And in the Parks, Recreation, and Community Services Department, there's $40,000 for social service resource assessment and analysis, and this ties directly to our strategic plan. So this is going to help us establish that baseline. Pavement preservation, $106,000 decrease. That doesn't mean you're going to get less, right? We don't target $1 to spend each year. There is no, we don't have that base budget. We target our goals and metrics. So even though the budget is decreasing, it's sufficient to meet the goals in our scheduling for pavement management. Commercial broker, this is a contingent fee. It's a decrease of $100,000. We'll actually incur this fee when the Samtec facilities are leased. The current year budget included $175,000 for that, based off of assumptions of a certain rate and a certain lease time frame. We've modified our assumptions for next fiscal year, which brought the cost down. But again, we won't incur those costs until we have contracts in hand. And elections costs, service costs are going down $42,000 because this is an every other year thing, and 2022 is an off year for us. Okay, looking at supplies, you can see that there's not a whole lot of change. In total, it's gone down by 1.7%. Total is $1.4 million, which is a $25,000 decrease from the current year budget. Of the $1.418 million, $236,000 would be for fuels and tires. Hopefully our fuel costs don't increase any more than they already have. Park and park landscaping supplies make up $150,000 of that. Wastewater facility and equipment supplies make up $132,000 of that, and traffic signal supplies and equipment make up $108,000 of that. For our other expenditures, the budget is $2.736 million in fiscal year 2022. Of that amount, $704,000 pertain to economic development agreements. So we entered into those agreements several years ago with Wadsworth Development at Northwest Hospital. We are anticipating that next fiscal year that those developers will fulfill their obligations under those agreements, so that the occupied square footage requirement and the jobs requirement will be fulfilled, and they have to demonstrate that to us. And if so, we'll have a payout next fiscal year. Those are clearly one-time costs. Those are built into the economic development departmental budget. So if you recall that earlier chart, it had a significant increase that's tied to these payouts. Of the $2.736 million, $589,000 would be for central service cost allocations. Insurance premiums, deductibles, and claims paid are $418,000. Special event related items are $254,000. Travel and training, $217,000. Membership dues, $110,000. Machinery and equipment rental, $106,000. And sponsorships would be $100,000. And this is really our contracts for Health and Human Services, so for food distribution and for housing and rental assistance and utility assistance. $100,000 for that was built in. And that is now going to be handled by Parks, Recreation, and Community Services rather than non-departmental. So you see, if you look at the highlights of change, we talked about the economic development incentive agreements. We are spending a little bit more for our town events to bring some enhancements and new things to the table. Some decreases are the business safety and recovery program. This was accounted for in the non-departmental, so if you remember, that department dropped by $800,000, so some of that was, a reorganization. $600,000 of it is tied to this, and this was related to COVID. This was made possible by the Arizona CARES funding, which was a one-time funding source, which paid for police staffing costs, but freed up money in the general fund that allowed us to make this contribution to the business community. And then you can see some other minor changes there year over year. Okay, so if we compare our revenues and expenditures by fund, and you may say, well, why do we even budget by fund? Well, first, because it's required to budget by fund. But the reason why it's required is because it's the way that we demonstrate compliance with laws and regulations and internal policies. So by way of example, the Highway User Revenue Fund, that's where we put all of our state-shared fuel taxes into that. So the revenues go in there, and all costs that consume the revenues that are there have to be for a specific purpose. In the case of the fuel taxes, it's for transportation purposes, so basically on our roadways. Could be for capital as well, but we use it strictly for operations. And if you didn't report it this way, if you commingled everything, then it'd be a lot easier to hide things. So this breaks it out at a more granular level. So looking at the general fund accounts for all the activity not recorded in other funds. It represents our unrestricted resources. Those are all accounted for here. And it accounts for the vast majority of our operation. If you looked at when we had personnel, 85% in the general fund. Supplies and services, most of those live in the general fund. So for the year, revenues exceed expenditures by $600,000. So we got revenues of $21.78 million and expenditures of $21.18 million. So that's a surplus of $500,000. So we have a policy that says the town manager recommended budget that our revenues need to be equal to or greater than the budgeted expenditures. So there you see it. We fulfill policy. Kelly has fulfilled policy.
Except that will go down now because we're adding one more person to the police department.
But not by that much, I'm hoping. Or I'm going to be a police officer.
So I should also point out in the general fund, the expenditures in the general fund for fiscal year 2022 include $1.33 million of non-recurring or one-time costs. So when we look into the future years, you're not going to see a lot of those costs, which means that surplus theoretically would be larger. Looking at the Highway User Revenue Fund, I referred to the state fuel taxes that are recorded there. You see how expenditures exceed revenues by $980,000. So how do we pay for that? Well, $500,000 is going to come from a transfer from the general fund to help offset the cost of the pavement preservation program. The rest is going to come from accumulated fund balances, so essentially our beginning fund balances. So this is okay for the current fiscal year, and we're pretty much going to deplete the vast majority of our available balances. But moving forward, we do have problems. So in the 5-year outlook, this fund goes deficit. It's not a surprise. And the reason why it's not a surprise is because the state fuel taxes have never been sufficient to pay for all the operational.
It hasn't been adjusted, I think, since '94.
Yeah, it's been since the early '90s since the fuel tax has been adjusted. So it's at 18 cents per gallon. So it's not a rate. And we know now that there are more alternative fuel vehicles than there were back in the '90s. And we also know that vehicles are more fuel efficient than they were in the '90s. And we also know that the costs to operate your streets has gone up since the 90s. So the buying power of the revenue sources has dropped off dramatically since the 90s. So this is a common issue, a common problem with municipalities in Arizona and counties in Arizona as well.
In some years, the legislative swept those monies as well.
Yes. Fortunately, the state budget is looking good, so they're not proposing any sweeps. But we know that this is something that we're gonna have to address in the future. You know, it could very well be additional general fund subsidy. We could look at cutting expenditures, but if we did that, it'd be hard to meet our goals from the strategic plan. You know, we look at other dedicated revenue source, you know, so there's myriad of things that we could look at. But for the current fiscal year, at the end of the day, we still can afford everything that we have in the budget. If we look at grants and restricted sources fund, you see we have a surplus, revenues exceeding expenditures of $3.7 million, and that's because $2.75 million is coming in from the ARPA funding. So a lot of that's going to get transferred out to our wastewater infrastructure capital projects. Some will carry forward to future years. The CFDs are legally separate with separate accounting. That gets incorporated into the town's budget as described earlier. You see in the registry, the CFD, that there are excess expenditures over revenues to the tune of $9.1 million, and those would be paid for with bond proceeds. The Capital Infrastructure Improvement Fund accounts for the majority of our capital projects, and you see that there are excess costs there, $4.8 million in excess costs, and those would be paid for with debt issuance, so debt proceeds, as well as interfund transfers. The Wastewater Enterprise Fund the wastewater fund is an enterprise fund, and that means that it's really intended to be self-sufficient. It should run like a business where the revenues it collects can pay for all of its costs and pay for its own reserves and whatnot. So you see revenues of $5.29 million, expenditures of $5.55 million, so you see a deficit of $261,000. Those excess costs are for capital items that are being paid for from ARPA funding transfers from the GARS fund. So I mentioned transfers, so this breaks it down for you. General fund will transfer $500,000 to the HERF fund for pavement preservation. The HERF and the wastewater funds will transfer small amounts to the Capital Infrastructure Improvement Fund to reimburse for vehicles that are purchased out of the SIF that pertain to those particular departments and functions. And the Grants and Restricted Sources Fund is transferring $585,000 to the SIF to do the sewer infrastructure project we talked about earlier, and that would be the ARPA funds that are being transferred, and $1.46 million for sewer infrastructure projects in the wastewater fund. So here's how things shake out at the end. So this is going to be net revenues less expenditures, plus or minus transfers, bond proceeds, and everything we incorporated here. And these would be what the fund budgets are. So for fiscal year 2022, the general fund budget totals $43.7 million. 21.18 would be $21.18 million would be the spending plan, and ending fund balances $22.58 million. So Kelly talked about ending balances of $10 million being the target at one point in time. So now we're looking at a number significantly higher than that. If you look at our ending fund balances and you compare that to expenditures, our ending balances are 106% of our expenditures. So that means we could not collect a single dollar in next year's budget and still be able to pay for everything in the general fund. That's an enviable position to be in. Most jurisdictions can't say that. So when we talk about being financially healthy, this is one of the metrics that's used. In the Highway User Revenue Fund, you see the ending balances going down to $25,200. So next year, this will be an issue that we'll have to resolve. Grants and Restricted Sources Fund, it's got $1.8 million in ending balances, and those balances that are carried forward are really mostly related to the ARPA funding. There's some restricted sources that are set aside for the police department and for the courts. Rancho Cerrito Community Facilities District Fund has ending balances of $9.9 million, and this is really unspent bond proceeds from our anticipated bond issuance that would carry forward to the future. Capital Infrastructure Improvement Fund, we have $7.4 million carrying forward to the future. Some of that will be unspent bond proceeds, as not all the construction on the Coyle Creek Boulevard Extension project won't be complete next fiscal year. Some of it will carry forward to the following fiscal year. And then we have the Wastewater Enterprise Fund. This is a big deal. It's got an ending fund balance of $275,000, and Kelly talked a little bit about this. but just to give you some historical perspective, it's been deficit since 2007. So, and we'll finally be in the black, and that means we're going to be eliminating our deficits.
Good job.
And the fund should have a positive balance by year end. This is 4 years ahead of what was projected in the 10-year financial plan. I don't know if you all remember that. We did that in October of 2017, developed a plan which said, well, we'll be in the black by 2026. So we're 4 years ahead of that schedule.
That's why growth is good.
It certainly helps. Well, you know, for utilities.
Well, I won't give that much credit.
Well, for utilities, you know, you build in all that capacity, and you have to front all the costs.
Right.
And then you hope and pray that development occurs to pay for all the costs you just obligated yourself to. So in that sense, that's where the growth is certainly good. But because it's in the black, the good thing is that the general fund no longer has to advance money over to it. So that frees up resources in the general fund. So that benefits the entire community. So how do we get in the black 4 years sooner than we thought? Well, it took some hard decisions by the town council. 4 consecutive years of 7% rate increases, not necessarily the popular thing to do, but we were obligated to do so to get in the black and to meet our debt service obligations, since we have to have a certain amount of revenue compared to our annual debt service payments. 4 years of 7% rate increases are hard, but the financial plan actually called for 6 consecutive years of 7% rate increases, so there's good news there. In the current year budget, we transferred $500,000 out of the general fund over to the wastewater enterprise fund. And this was made possible by the Arizona CARES funding. We did not use Arizona CARES funding to do this. We paid for police department personnel costs with AZ CARES funding. But that freed up money in the general fund to allow this community investment that we talked about earlier. So $600,000 for businesses, $500,000 helps the residential, the people in the town. And of course, the general fund not having to pitch in benefits the entire town. And it was also made possible by refinancing our debt obligations. So we took advantage of low interest rates, locked into that rate, which saved a substantial amount of money. So all of that put us in the wonderful position that we'll be in by the end of next fiscal year. We're not in a, we still have deficits moving into the year, but next year we should be in the black by the end, assuming all of our growth assumptions pan out. So these ending balances are great to have, but they're still not sufficient to fulfill its own reserve requirement. So given our 5-year outlook, that reserve requirement should be built up over the next couple of years, and then it should really be self-sufficient. Okay, we have some policy issues in the general fund we need to look at. The non-spendable portion of our ending fund balances, which again total $22.58 million, $10,000 is non-spendable, in non-spendable form. In years past, I would come to you and this number would be millions or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that was because it was non-spendable because it was tied up into the wastewater deficits. So the wastewater fund already used the money. So this goes away. So this isn't even worth mentioning in future years. And this $10,000 related to a long-term note receivable. So and if we look at our spendable fund balances, we have reserves and we have a policy requirement to set aside funds that does that. We have $100,000 budgeted for manager contingency. Just to put that in perspective a little bit, the current fiscal year had $250,000. The reason why we had it that high this year was because of COVID. We really didn't know what to expect, so there was more latitude provided to the town manager. So now we're suggesting that we can drop that back down to $100,000, which has sort of been our historical norm. Now, our policy requires that if Kelly does appropriate this money, that he send a notice to the town council on its use. And that leaves unassigned fund balances of $17.48 million for a total of $22.58 million. We have a minimum fund balance requirement in our operating funds, which would include our general fund, HERF fund, and wastewater fund. That should be at least 25% of our budget operating expenditures. So our fund balance should be at least that amount. The highway user revenue fund does not have enough, and the wastewater fund doesn't have enough yet in the fiscal year budget ahead. So the minimum requirement by policy in the general fund would be $5.3 million. There's a deficit of $879,000 in the HERF fund, deficit of $334,000 in the wastewater fund, So we should have minimum fund balance of $6.51 million. We have $22.58 million. We're well over that minimum requirement. Look at the ending fund balances in the other funds. We talked a little bit about this. So the general fund accounts for all of our available resources that are sort of at the latitude and discretion of the town council and their policies. The highway user fund is restricted for transportation and roadways. The grants and restricted sources fund is for police and court uses and for specific grant uses such as ARPA funding, where we're going to be limited in how we can use that. But sewer infrastructure is something we could use it for. CFDs are for CFD purposes, and the Capital Infrastructure Improvement Fund, it's 100% restricted for unspent bond proceeds or assigned for capital by policy. So we have a construction contracting tax of 4%. 100% of those funds are assigned to the Capital Infrastructure Improvement Fund, and that's how we account for it pursuant to the resolution. Other jurisdictions will commingle those funds into their general fund or take a portion and put that in the capital projects fund. Some have these hybrid assignments. We put 100% into our capital fund because we view that as a one-time revenue source to pay for one-time projects, which are our capital projects. The wastewater fund, 100% of those ending balances are unassigned, so they're not externally restricted, but they're really unassigned for wastewater uses. So as I mentioned, we do our budget with a 5-year outlook. So there are different components. This here is a summation of all of our activity resulting in ending fund balance. So it's revenues, less expenditures, debt, and all that's built into this, and resulting in ending fund balances. So the dark green area represents those resources that are restricted, and is either restricted by state law or via the debt obligations that we enter into, which the spending has to be for whatever infrastructure was entailed. So you see that the restricted portion is 15.013 in 2022, and then it dwindles down to 262,000. Most of it goes away in 2022 and 2023, and that is related to our unspent bond proceeds. So we're going to get those bonds, we're going to spend the bond proceeds for infrastructure and bring about more development in the community. Our reserves are targeted at $5 million per year. Again, we don't presume there will be a policy change in the future. That's something that we can look at as time moves on, but for the 5-year plan, we've got $5 million allocated for our reserves. And then you have what's available, everything above that has no restrictions on it whatsoever. So in fiscal year 2022, by the end of the year, $22.12 million. And by 2026, we're saying that number will be $33.4 million. So there's some capital elements into this. If you pull out the capital side of things and you just look at the operational side of things, mainly in the general fund surpluses go beyond 2022 because that has a lot of one-time cost built in. But when we look at 2023, 24, 25, 26, $2 to $2.5 million in surpluses. Now, again, I'm not presuming we're going to be adding all these additional stuff. I'm just saying that if we pay for what we have, what we've obligated ourselves to in the 2022 budget, these are the amount of surpluses we'll have.
But that goes to what Melissa and others have talked about. If we will go a 3-year plan, potentially for raises and things like that, that gives us the capacity to have those discussions, correct?
That's right. This is an important slide because it gives us, well, the way it's labeled, a 5-year outlook. It tells us that under our current assumptions, as we look out 5 years, we're going to be able to afford, we're going to be able to pay for a level of service and feel comfortable about it.
Right.
But those assumptions may change, where things may happen, but certainly it gives us an idea of what we can look forward to.
Right.
We know we can feel comfortable about.
Right.
And so this is a great slide. It's an important slide for us to keep in mind as we examine, well, can we afford to give raises? Can we afford to add people? This helps us understand those concepts.
All right. So to summarize, it's not to summarize my presentation, it's to summarize
the thing. On one slide, you should have gone to the slide.
To summarize the manager recommended budget. As I mentioned, 2021 will end better than we anticipated, which means we're beginning next fiscal year better off. We are offering you a balanced budget that is affordable and sustainable for at least the next 5 years. If you look at, and I say that because if you look at the general fund, our revenues exceed expenditures each year, and by a lot. You know, you're not seeing it in the 2022 budget because there's a lot of one-time costs, but in the future, certainly that appears to be the case under the current assumptions that we've built in. So wastewater deficits, these have been eliminated. It's been a long time since I could say that. And in the future, it actually establishes its own reserves and looks really good. HERF deficits in the future are going to be a concern, but those deficits are less than the general fund surpluses that we're programming. So we could solve that problem just by shifting more, general fund transfers over. I'm not suggesting that that is the solution, but it's the potential solution. And the other funds are only consuming the resources that are available to them. We are offering some reorganized divisions. We're adding staff, and there's some positional changes, minor positional changes to keep up with demand from new growth and to provide for more efficient and effective services. There's a lot of costs in here in the capital side that Kelly was talking about earlier for maintenance and replacement of facilities, roads, parks, vehicles, and technology. And as always, there's a big emphasis on focusing on the strategic plan. And while that could conclude my presentation, it doesn't. So I'll try to get through the next slide. There's only a few slides. We're in the home stretch here. So looking at the 5-year capital improvement plan. So this is a plan that accounts for big-ticket capital projects and our one-time major repair and maintenance programs. Typically, it'd be items that cost $50,000 or more. It's only the first year that's included in the budget. So you see that $8.084 million of the total 5-year $39.75 million. That's the only part that's actually getting programmed with the budget. The rest is just a plan and a planning figure. So it's one of the things like we do with a 5-year outlook. This is something that we revisit every year that allows us to change according to current conditions and or different assumptions and or shifting priorities. Case in point, 2 years ago, for the current fiscal year, we would have thought that we were doing more than we were doing. But when COVID hit, the plan really shrunk down. So this is something we change on an annual basis. There are 31 projects included in the plan through 2026. So if we look at the plan by function, there are 3 projects for streets, which would total $7.3 million. There are 14 park projects, totaling $4.76 million. There are 3 public safety, namely police department projects, $3.4 million for that. There are 2 sewer projects, $6.5 million, and there are 9 general governmental projects to the tune of $17.7 million. And that's where sidewalk the square is accounted for in the item. I should back up a slide. So you see the spike in fiscal year 2026. That would be $14 million in change for sidewalk the square construction. Some notable projects for public works. It does include the Coyle Crossing Boulevard extension and bridge, $6.29 million. That project is currently underway. We're in the design. It's soon to be wrapped up with construction commencing next fiscal year and will continue through fiscal year. I don't know how far into fiscal year 2023, but it'll be wrapped up in 2023. We've got the wastewater facility re-rating upgrades and the wastewater lab. Those are going to be funded with the ARPA funds. That's an allowable use for that funding source. $5.8 million for the re-rating upgrades. This will provide a lot more capacity to our wastewater treatment plant without actually doing a treatment plant expansion, which would be anywhere between $15 and $20 million. So this money goes a long way in saving us costs down the road. The re-rating upgrades will be in fiscal year 2022 and 2023. The wastewater lab design is our current fiscal year, and that will be constructed in next fiscal year. We have La Vita roadway widening design to the tune of $640,000 over the next 2 fiscal years, and that will be a 50-50 shared cost with the Green Valley 28 developer. We have a lot of municipal complex facility repairs that Kelly alluded to, $414,000 actually included in the budget. Twin Views property projects, Kelly talked about those. And we have equipment acquisition and replacement. This is $365,000. That's not an annual cost, that's the total cost over the 5 years, but there's an annual allotment of those costs, about $75,000 a year on average. And that's for the streets department mainly. If we look at Parks Department, see the splash pad in fiscal year 2023 for $1.21 million, and that will be that's something that we'll be able to do because we'll have sewer lines, because that was an issue for us because the county won't allow us to connect any other facilities like septic. We have an inclusive playground at MMX Park for fiscal year 2024, $680,000 program for that. That assumes that donations will fund half of that project. Wrightson Ridge School Park improvements, $590,000 in fiscal 2025. That includes a 1 acre area with the Ramada, play and fitness equipment, benches, and pathways. We have the sewer lines at MMX Park funded with the ARPA funds, and that will happen in the budget year. Play structure at Lake Park, $450,000 in fiscal 25. Shade structure over bleachers in fiscal 2026, and those bleachers are at Animax and North Park, $360,000 for that. And our park maintenance facility, the office space for the maintenance staff right now is really bad. That facility is quite dilapidated, so we need to do something in the next 5 years, and we're expecting that to cost $260,000. There are 7 other parks projects that cost $125,000 each, totaling $636,000. There's some fun projects in there. They're small dollar amounts, but they're all good stuff. Okay, we look at the other category, see the Sahuarita Square Catalyst project at $14.8 million. So we're actually programming design costs, $250,000 a year in 2022 and 2023, and I know this is 2006, so it should say 2026, $14.3 million for construction. I think once we get the design in place, we'll actually better be able to program when construction is the right, when's the right time to build that. But right now, we put it in the last year of the plan. The next series of costs you see are, sort of the recurring costs. Again, these are 5-year costs. Again, police department, you have to replace the fleet, you have to replace the vehicles. We have our general motor pool, we have to replace vehicles there. They're on a 5-year rotation. So for a motor pool, we're looking at about 36 vehicles over 5 years. And for the police vehicle replacement program, we're looking at about 6 patrol and 2 administrative vehicles on an annual basis. Technology, obviously we use it more and more. There's cybersecurity issues, and we have ongoing investment for that.
I might point out to the council as well that this, I think, is also an important retention element to our police department, is that we do provide quality vehicles. That's their office. We provide quality vehicles and equipment to our officers. So we spend appropriately to give them that type of equipment. I feel helps in retention.
And in case you don't know, police MDCs, that would be mobile data computers. So it's the laptops that they use in the vehicles, and they can also pull them out and use them elsewhere, and handheld radios. Okay, so again, I mentioned that there are 31 total projects, totaling $39.75 million. They're being funded from a variety of sources. Most notably, debt and capital leases will pay for 62% of the total, $24.5 million. That debt is for motor pool leases, PD vehicle leases, Coyle Crossing Boulevard extension, and then in the outer year, we are expecting to issue debt to do the Sahuarita Square construction. Grants and contributions, $7.7 million will pay for our wastewater projects. Again, that's ARPA funding, Animax sewer lines, ARPA funding. Lobby Eat the Road, half of the costs of the widening designs will come from developer contributions, and the inclusive playground, half of that cost we expect to come from donations from the community. And then our local funding sources, which would primarily be our construction contracting tax that we talked about, is allocated in the SIF, $7.4 million, or 19% of the total. So what are the next steps? Mr. Mayor, you covered this very well in your address earlier on. And so this is the schedule that we've laid out. Next council meeting, if you feel we need to have more discussion on the budget, we could certainly do that at the next meeting. Tentative budget on June 10th. and then final budget adoption on the June 24th council meeting. So with that, turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Did you have any last comments, Kelly? I think are you clear? There's only a couple of things I think you heard from us. So other than that, I think, other than those couple of tweaks, I think you're good to go.
Got it.
Any other questions? Good job as always. And I expect all those next council meetings, I want to go through all those slides all over again.
Hey, see, the next time we do this, why don't you have some Wagner music come on right at the end? A nice rousing, robust.
Especially the wastewater going into black, you know, you want the crescendo there. Having no more business, we're adjourned. Thanks, Izzy. That was very good.